Chapter 25. At the end, Shang Junlin's voice was filled with coldness. Prince Li's forehead was covered in cold sweat as he knelt down. I wouldn't dare. I think you're very daring. If I hadn't happened to meet you today, how would you have bullied Gui Jun? Shang Junlin walked behind Xinyu and reached out to pull her into his arms. I didn't know that Prince Li and Prince Yu were so concerned about my and Guijuan's private matters. Prince Yu had already knelt down. Under the emperor's pressure, he only dared to glance at Xinyu. Xinyu leaned in the tall man's arms with a relaxed posture. There was no fear on her face at all. She really wasn't afraid that Shang Junlin would find out about what had happened between them. Prince Yu finally understood this. Did Shang Junlin already dote on Xinyu this much? Prince Yu's lowered eyes were dark. Who gave you the courage to bully my Gui Jun, Chem? The palace servants around them were already kneeling. Shang Junlin's cold voice sounded on the empty path. Prince Li buried his head, and the clothes on his back were gradually soaked with cold sweat. He couldn't figure out why Shang Junlin would suddenly appear here. The informant he planted in the palace said that the emperor was discussing business in the imperial study and wouldn't come out for a while. He also happened to see Xinyu leaving Yuzhong Palace alone, so he came to stop her. Prince Li knew how difficult Shang Junlin was to deal with, so he wanted to make a move on Xinyu. He didn't expect that Shang Junlin would catch him red-handed. Your Majesty, I know my mistake. Shang Junlin was furious, so Prince Li didn't even dare to plead for mercy on his behalf. He didn't even dare to imagine how much Shang Junlin had heard of his threats to Xinyu. I know my mistake, Prince Yu, who had been silent all this time, spoke in a hoarse voice. I just wanted to ask Gui Jun some things on behalf of a friend. Prince Yu's words were also a reminder to Xinyu that some things shouldn't be said in front of the emperor. Upon hearing this, Mu Shi glared at Prince Yu. He dared to do it but did not dare to admit it. What a scumbag. His Royal Highness Prince of Yu is really close to the people. I just don't know what the relationship between that friend and Prince of Yu is. Is it worth it for Prince of Yu to take such a big risk to enter the palace for him? Xinyu cast a sidelong glance at Prince of Yu, who was kneeling on the ground. Your subject, Your Highness Prince Yu is not talking about yourself, right? If Prince Yu has something to ask me, just ask directly. There is no need to beat around the bush. Xinyu interrupted him. The Prince of Yu was silent. Xinyu was right. He did not dare to say those things in front of Shang Junlin. It was a serious crime for a vassal to return to the capital without permission. Shang Junlin squeezed Xinyu's hand and deliberately used a low voice that both Prince Li and Prince Yu could hear. Does your highness know what Prince Yu wants to ask you? His fingers involuntarily clenched. Prince of Yu stared at the ground, his heart in his throat. He was afraid that Xinyu would say it, but in addition to his fear, he was also somewhat expectant. He was expectant that Xinyu would say it and admit the feelings that had not been declared. Maybe he wants to ask me why I agreed to enter the palace. Who knows? Xinyu answered carelessly. Shang Junlin glanced at Xinyu deeply and skipped the topic. Then what about Prince Li? Why did Prince Li look for your highness? Your subject, of course it is because of the position of Empress. The two people's voices sounded at almost the same time. Xinyu had already spoken. Prince Li knew that there was no use in hiding it, so he simply shut his mouth. Your Majesty, you don't know. In order to persuade me to persuade you to take a consort, Prince Li began to threaten me with the matter of you accompanying me to the residence of Zhanbei. Your subject has indeed misunderstood this matter. Your subject is willing to apologize to your highness. Prince Li had no other choice but to admit his guilt. His Majesty was willing to open his mouth and admit that the person at the residence of Zhanbei that day was himself. If he continued to insist, he would only be asking for a rebuff. No matter who had appeared at the residence of Zhanbei with Xinyu that day, since Shang Junlin had opened his mouth, it could only be him. Prince Li could not understand. What was so good about Xinyu that made the emperor favor him so much? Shang Junlin looked down at the two people for a while and said indifferently, Come, Prince Li and Prince Yu have been disrespectful to your highness. Flog them 100 times. Your Majesty. Prince Li raised his head in disbelief. You want to flog your own uncle because of this evil consort? Shang Junlin lowered his eyes, his voice still neither fast nor slow. You can also choose to enter the secret prison. Shin Yu, you evil consort. Your Majesty. Your Majesty. You can't be so muddle-headed, I'm your own uncle. Prince Li struggled. The one who gave the order was your Majesty. How can Prince Li blame me? Feeling Prince Li's resentful gaze, the corner of his mouth curled up. Since Prince Li is being punished, you should reflect on yourself. Prince Li, don't pretend to be stupid. No one is stupid. Do you really think I don't know your true purpose for coming to find me? You want me to make way for you and your good niece. You should see if you're worthy. Shin Yu laughed mockingly. You. Prince Li's face turned red with anger when his thoughts were exposed. Seeing that Prince Yu was silent, he couldn't help but say, Prince Yu, don't you have anything to say? Are you just going to watch Shin Yu continue to be so glorious? Imperial uncle, this matter is indeed our fault. We deserve to be punished. Prince Yu didn't know why Shin Yu didn't directly expose him in front of Shang Junlin. Shin Yu was too crazy. No one knew what he would do in the next moment. Right now, he didn't have a hold on Shin Yu's weakness, but Shin Yu had a hold on his. He didn't dare to gamble. Shang Junlin walked in front of Prince Li with Shin Yu, his voice cold. We have already warned you. Don't have any ideas you shouldn't have. Don't think that we can tolerate you for the rest of your life. Prince Li's private actions were endless, and he even tried to control him by interfering with the harem. Shang Junlin had tolerated him for a long time. The guards dragged Prince Li away while he struggled. His Majesty had personally ordered that even if it was a prince, the executioners would still beat him without exception. Shun Yu was led to the imperial study by Shang Junlin. Did you suffer? Shang Junlin ordered someone to pour hot tea and urged Shun Yu to drink it. Shun Yu didn't expect Shang Junlin's first sentence to be this. He thought that Shang Junlin would ask him about Prince Yu, so he was stunned. Then he smiled. Your Majesty came at the right time. I didn't suffer. In terms of suffering, Shun Yu felt that Prince Li and Prince Yu might be even more aggrieved. Why did your Majesty suddenly go over? Shun Yu remembered that Shang Junlin was busier than usual because there were some matters that had been presented to him in the past 2 days. I heard that someone reported that Prince Li and Prince Yu were staying in the palace. I wanted to see what they were doing. In fact, he was in the middle of his work when he heard from the hidden dragon guards that Prince Li and Prince Yu were planning to cause trouble for Shun Yu. No matter why your Majesty went over, I still want to thank your Majesty for helping me out. Shun Yu curled up on the warm soft couch like a cat. Shang Junlin ordered someone to put the soft couch in the imperial study to make it convenient for Shun Yu to rest when he came over. It was incompatible with the cold and hard style of the imperial study. Back then, Shang Junlin took over the soft couch that Shun Yu used to read. Shun Yu casually said, Your Majesty took over my couch. Take it as compensation. The next day, a soft couch was added to the imperial study. Later on, Shun Yu found that not only the imperial study, but also any place that he might go would have a comfortable place for him to rest. How can I let others bully my emperor? Shang Junlin sat in front of the throne and continued to read the memorials. Hearing Shang Junlin's words, Shun Yu's heart trembled slightly. In his 2 lifetimes, Shang Junlin was the only one who could stand in front of him unconditionally and protect him from all the storms. Your Majesty is so good to me. It was not the first time that Shun Yu said this. Every time he said it, he felt deeper than the previous time. The first time, he just wanted to let the man know that half of it was to please him. But after every time, he got rid of the impurities bit by bit, leaving only the purest feelings. Eunuch Meng had already been ordered to have the imperial kitchen serve hot food. Shun Yu did not sit for long before a palace servant came in with steaming hot food. It's time to eat. Why don't you stay and eat with me? With the emperor's order in advance, the imperial kitchen served Shun Yu's favorite dishes. There were also a few snacks that Shun Yu liked. Shun Yu had never eaten them in Yuzhang Palace. Your Majesty, is there a new imperial chef in the imperial kitchen? Shun Yu picked up a white and sticky snack and put it in his mouth. Under the stimulation of the sweetness, he narrowed his eyes in satisfaction. It's a new style that they have researched. If you like it, I will let them serve you in Yuzhang Palace. Shang Junlin had little interest in sweets and ate the food in his bowl. After eating with Shang Junlin for so long, Shen Yu found that Shang Junlin did not care about food at all. He ate whatever was given to him and was very easy to feed. Shen Yu still remembered one time when he and Shang Junlin ate together. The taste of a dish served by the imperial kitchen was very indescribable. Shen Yu only ate one bite and did not want to force himself to continue eating. Shang Junlin could eat more than half of the plate without changing his expression. After that day, Shen Yu complained about Shang Junlin's taste for a long time. Since then, whenever the two ate together, the dishes served were all dishes that suited Shen Yu's taste. Why does your majesty send all the good things to Yuzhang Palace? Shen Yu bit his chopsticks. In the long run, won't Yuzhang Palace become the richest palace in the palace? Shang Junlin, the palace is mine, and so is your majesty. It's just a matter of changing the place to put things. If your majesty is happy, it can be considered that they have played their role. Shen Yu, your majesty is really getting better at saying sweet nothings. Shang Junlin frowned. I'm just telling the truth. Shen Yu smiled but did not say anything. That's why it's said that sometimes inadvertent sweet nothings are the most touching. After the meal, Shen Yu and Shang Junlin nestled on the soft couch. Shang Junlin sat upright and seriously read the memorials. Shen Yu leaned on his shoulder and read a novel. The novel was found in the Imperial Library Pavilion. It wasn't accurate to say that it was a novel. In fact, it talked about the history of the relationships of the past emperors. Shen Yu read it with great interest. The history of the past emperors of the Shang family was really rich in love. There were many kinds of things, such as substitutes, seizing, love rivals turning into lovers. There were all kinds of things. In comparison, Shang Junlin's history of relationships was as clean as a white sheet of paper. Compared with the past emperors, Shang Junlin was really out of place in terms of relationships. If Shen Yu remembered correctly, in his previous life, Shang Junlin's harem seemed to have no one except for Shen Qingran, who was tricked into entering the palace by him. Even in his previous life, Shen Qingran only saw Shang Junlin a few times after entering the palace, let alone having physical contact with Shang Junlin. It was said that tyrants didn't like to be touched. In his previous life, after Shen Qingran escaped from the palace, he complained that one time he accidentally touched Shang Junlin's arm and was grounded for a few days. What are you thinking about? Shang Junlin looked away from the memorials and turned to see Shen Yu staring at him in a daze. I'm thinking about your majesty. Shen Yu paused for a moment and glanced at the memorials in Shang Junlin's hands. Your majesty is worried about the flood control issue? That's right. Shang Junlin did not hide anything and handed the memorials in his hands to Shen Yu so that he could read them more clearly. Are you interested? The memorials were presented from Lin County. Lin County was located in the south of Da. Because of the terrain, it had been affected by floods every year since the founding of Da. Da had invested countless manpower and resources into the flood control issue, but the results were minimal. Every emperor of Da had been worried about Lin County. Shen Yu had witnessed the disaster in Lin County in his previous life and knew how tragic it would be. Later, with the help of Shen Qingran, the King of Yu made a great contribution to the flood control issue. This was the beginning of the King of Yu's power. Shen Yu had seriously studied Shen Qingran's flood control plan in his previous life. It was indeed better than any of the existing plans in Da. Some time ago, when Shen Yu was thinking about what to give Shang Junlin as a birthday gift, he suddenly thought of this. He deliberately chose a day when Shang Junlin was not in Yuzhang Palace and wrote down the plans he remembered one by one. He planned to give them to Shang Junlin. If he had prepared in advance, perhaps there would not have been such a tragic situation like in his previous life. Today, he suddenly came up with the idea of leaving Yuzhang Palace and wanted to give the things he wrote down to Shang Junlin. Your Majesty knows that I have been in poor health since I was young and liked to read miscellaneous books. A few days ago, I sorted out some useful things that I had read in the past and thought that Your Majesty might be able to use them. Shen Yu took out a thin book from his arms. The cover of the book was blank. Shen Yu handed the book to Shang Junlin. Your Majesty, please take a look. Shang Junlin took the book, opened it, and glanced at it. His movements paused. Without changing his expression, he roughly read the contents. The book was not long, and it did not take long for Shang Junlin to finish flipping through it. He closed the book and grabbed Shen Yu's arm with a little force. Where did Gui Jun read these contents? It had to be said that the contents of this book could play a big role. He told Shen Yu about the incident in Lin County not because he wanted to get some advice from Shen Yu. He did not expect that Shen Yu would give him such a big surprise. Can it help your majesty? Shen Yu did not answer Shang Junlin's question. He could not tell Shang Junlin that he got this from Shen Qingran in his previous life, at least not now. Looking at Shen Yu's expression, Shang Junlin knew that Shen Yu would not say anything even if he continued to ask. There were more than 1 or 2 secrets on Shen Yu's body. It did not matter if there was one more. Shang Junlin was not anxious. He suppressed his rare gaffe and let go of Shen Yu's arm. Gui Jun has really helped me a lot. This is a gift for your majesty. Does your majesty like it? Shen Yu was relieved that Shang Junlin did not ask about the origin of the book. Although he had thousands of ways to hide it, he did not want to lie to Shang Junlin about this matter. I like it very much. Shang Junlin's fingers that were holding the book tightened. The ink in his dark eyes was rolling, but it soon returned to calmness. Your Majesty, I have a presumptuous request. When your Majesty is discussing with the ministers, can you not mention that this book came from me? Shen Yu thought for a while and made a request. You have presented such a useful method. Logically speaking, you should be rewarded. Do you really not want it? Shang Junlin raised his eyebrows. Was this the Shen Gui Jun who asked for a reward just because his maid was frightened? I already said that this is a birthday gift for your Majesty. What's the point of asking for a reward? Besides, the contents of the book did not come from him. Shen Yu had no interest in falsely claiming other people's credit. The book also said that many of the things that Shen Qingran presented were the result of the wisdom of several generations of people. Shen Qingran could shamelessly claim credit for himself, but it did not mean that Shen Yu could do the same. Shen Yu never wanted things that did not belong to him. When your Majesty's birthday comes, I will also give your Majesty a big gift. On that day, Shang Junlin discussed matters in the imperial study until midnight. When he returned to Yuzhong Palace, Shen Yu was already fast asleep. He took off his outer clothes and lay on the bed. Not long after, Shen Yu found the source of heat and came over. Shang Junlin pulled her into his arms and slowly closed his eyes. The news that Prince Li and Prince Yu dragged their injuries out of the palace quickly spread in the capital's upper circle. Being at the center of power and involving 2 princes, the ministers were privately speculating about what had happened. They did not have much time to speculate. The next day, the palace issued a decree that Prince Li and Prince Yu were ordered to reflect on their mistakes in seclusion because they had offended the Emperor and your Majesty. The people who heard the news looked at each other. Prince Li was disrespectful to your Majesty and your Majesty at the palace banquet. At that time, I felt that he might be in trouble. I thought that your Majesty did not make things difficult for Prince Li on the spot because he was concerned about his reputation. I did not expect, it makes sense for Prince Li, but what about Prince Yu? Prince Yu has always been honest and dutiful. He would not have run into your Majesty, who is in the limelight, right? He was beaten with a rod and punished to reflect on his mistakes in seclusion. His Majesty really did not give him any face. If you ask me, Prince Li deserves it. He has been abusing his achievements for several years. Who is your Majesty? Is he someone he can control? His Majesty is doing this to give him a warning, right? Prince Yu was also punished. It is really puzzling. What is there to be puzzled about? I heard that Prince Yu and Prince Li met in private several times. Maybe they were secretly plotting something and your Majesty noticed it. In the capital, there was no lack of discussion about these matters. The voices outside were passed to Prince Li and Prince Yu through the mouths of people with intentions. The 2 of them threw a big tantrum in the residence. The servants who served them were trembling in fear for several days, not daring to make the slightest mistake. The incident between Prince Yu and Prince Li was a warning to the other members of the royal family. The vassals who returned to the capital all declined social engagements and stayed in their manors obediently, praying that the day of returning to their fiefdoms would come soon. Because of this incident, the last group of people who wanted to persuade Shang Junlin to choose a concubine also gave up the idea. Everyone knew that Prince Li had a grudge with Shen Guijun because he failed to send his niece to the palace. The outside of the palace could not affect the inside of the palace. After listening to Mu Shi report the situation outside of the palace, Shen Yu casually withdrew his gaze. "How is the farmstead?" Shen Yu asked as he handed the flowers he picked to the palace servant behind him. "Everything is as usual." Mu Shi walked forward a few steps closer to Shen Yu and lowered her voice. "Gongzi, the people at the farmstead sent this servant to tell you that the vermilion cotton you asked for has bloomed. Is that so? Tell them that I will find time to go take a look." The vermilion cotton referred to the task Shen Yu ordered before entering the palace. The blooming of the flowers meant that the task he ordered had been completed. The only drawback of entering the palace was that it was too inconvenient to communicate with the outside of the palace. His power had not yet developed, so it was too inconvenient for him to personally command. It seemed that he had to think of a way to leave the palace alone, or take Shang Junlin to the farmstead. "Your Majesty, it's not good," the palace servant ran over in a panic. "Yunyang committed suicide in the palace and insisted on seeing you." "No one stopped her?" Shen Yu frowned. He had not asked about these imperial concubines after he brought them back to Yuzhang Palace. Other than not being allowed to step out of the room and not being allowed to have contact with outsiders, everything was the same as before. Why did they suddenly make a scene? "We stopped her, we couldn't stop her." The palace servant's tone was anxious. "Do you know what happened?" "This servant doesn't know. Today, this servant went to deliver food to the Nyang as usual and saw Nyang hanging a white silk on the beam of the room," the palace servant explained as she led Shen Yu to the destination. Before they got close, they heard the noise in the courtyard. Shen Yu quickened his pace and frowned as he looked at the chaotic little courtyard. "Stop! Your Majesty is here." The little eunuch behind Shen Yu stepped forward and sternly scolded. "What are you doing? How can you be in such a mess? Nyang, didn't you say you wanted to see your Majesty?" "Your Majesty is already here." The palace servant who led Shen Yu said loudly. "Your Majesty, Chunqie knows she was wrong. Chunqie is willing to say anything. Please let Chunqie off." Nyang pushed away the palace servant in front of her and walked a few steps to Shen Yu before kneeling down. "Oh. Is it possible that there is a hidden story behind your collective seduction of His Majesty?" Shen Yu asked calmly. "Your Majesty, please understand. Chunqie really didn't do it willingly." Nyang kowtowed a few times. "Chunqie is willing to say anything. I only ask that your Majesty can save Chunqie's life." Shen Yu narrowed his eyes and ordered, "Mu Shi, clear out the insignificant people in the courtyard and send someone to invite His Majesty over. Remember, don't spread the news." This servant obeys. In the blink of an eye, the courtyard was empty. When Shen Yu brought them back, he arranged them in different places. Originally, it was to prevent these imperial concubines from exchanging information with each other. Now, it was convenient for him. "Let's talk inside." Shen Yu walked into the room and sat on the main seat. Several palace servants stood beside him and Mu Shi stood on his right. "You said you want me to save your life. What happened?" Nyang couldn't hide the panic on her face. She looked around nervously before saying in a small voice, "Your Majesty, someone wants to kill me." "Kill you?" Mu Shi was puzzled. Yuzhang Palace is heavily guarded. Living here is much safer than where you lived before. Why would someone want to kill you? Chunqie doesn't dare to lie. Chunqie woke up in the middle of the night several times and felt that someone was standing by the bed with something in their hand. They were staring at Chunqie with cold air. Nyang swallowed. Chunqie was very scared and didn't dare to open her eyes to take a look. "Then how did you know that someone wanted to kill you?" It was Chunqie who inadvertently saw that the person was holding a dagger in his hand. Nyang was scared silly. Before she entered the palace, she was at most an ordinary girl who was a little scheming. She had never seen such a scene. She didn't even dare to confirm whether that person was real or fake. The next day, she made a fuss. She didn't know why that person didn't kill her the previous few times and didn't dare to bet that person wouldn't kill her in the future. When she agreed to that matter, she knew that if she couldn't complete it or fell into the emperor's hands, her end wouldn't be good. Now, before her plan could be executed, she was unexpectedly imprisoned by Shen Yu in Yuzhang Palace. If there were no accidents, the mission was destined to not be completed. She had every reason to believe that that person would kill her one step ahead of time so that she wouldn't reveal the secret. Your Majesty, Chen Qie really didn't lie. I know. When Shen Yu planned to bring everyone to Yuzhang Palace, he had thought about what to do if the person behind the scenes didn't want to be exposed and directly attacked these people. Shang Junlin also had the hidden dragon guards pay attention to the movements here. If someone really wanted to make a move, they would definitely be discovered at the first moment. That person didn't kill concubine Yu for a long time. Perhaps he was worried about this. Furthermore, if that person hadn't been discovered, it was highly possible that he was one of the people who had been serving in the courtyard. Shen Yu thought about the hidden dragon guards that Shang Junlin had instructed to follow him around. He didn't know if he could order them around. He tried to use the method that Shang Junlin usually used to instruct the hidden dragon guards to shout. A man in black appeared silently in the room. Your Majesty, what instructions do you have for me? It seemed like he could order them around. Get someone to guard the courtyard. Don't let anyone leave this place. If anyone acts strangely, immediately restrain them. Shen Yu instructed. Yes. After he finished speaking, the man in black disappeared. Shen Yu trusted the hidden dragon guard's abilities. He heaved a sigh of relief. If he didn't handle this properly, he was afraid that he would have alerted the enemy. Tell me everything you know. Shen Yu supported himself with one hand on the armrest and looked down calmly. It all started from 10 years ago. 10 years ago, there was a change in the throne and a new emperor ascended to the throne. This meant that the era of the previous emperor had completely passed. Not long after the new emperor ascended to the throne, there was an emergency at the border. The new emperor led his cavalry to destroy the invaders and reclaim the lost land. For a long time, the imperial palace was without an emperor. The new emperor left the imperial palace too quickly and the transfer of power was not complete. The old power and the new power were in a mess. The imperial palace was the biggest power center and was affected the most. The previous emperor passed away suddenly and left behind a group of concubines and immature princes. Among them, there were many young girls like concubine Yu who had just entered the imperial palace and had no power or influence. Someone secretly approached them and asked them to find a way to continue staying in the imperial palace. In the beginning, that person sent us a lot of gold, silver, jewels and beautiful jewelry. He said that he couldn't bear to see us living in the imperial palace so pitiful. Later on, he would occasionally ask us to do some small things or spread some news outside the imperial palace. These were all very small things. Even if we were discovered, it wouldn't endanger our lives. A few years passed in the blink of an eye. His Majesty returned to the imperial court and spent more and more time in the imperial palace. That person asked us to find a way to get close to His Majesty and said that it would be best if we could become His Majesty's people. His appetite is very big. How can he be sure that His Majesty will accept you? This was the part that Shen Yu couldn't understand the most. No matter how beautiful or young these women were, they couldn't hide the fact that they were the previous emperor's concubines. Maybe they thought that I would be like the previous emperor who didn't abstain from meat and vegetables. Shang Junlin's indifferent voice came from the door. Shen Yu looked up and saw a tall man dressed in a golden dragon robe with a black background walking in step by step against the light. Your Majesty came so quickly. Shen Yu stood up to greet him. I saw that the person you sent to call me was anxious, so I came directly. What happened? Shang Junlin held Shen Yu's hand and walked to the high seat. Shen Yu told him the news that he had just received. For the time being, I asked about this. Shang Junlin sat on the main seat and stroked Shen Yu's wrist. He said faintly, continue. What happened next was very simple. That person kept sending them things through the palace servants and asked them to do some unremarkable things. Then he ordered them to find a way to get close to the emperor. Originally, that person didn't want us to get close to His Majesty. Later, when Gui Jun entered the imperial palace, that person was stimulated and gave us a death order. He told us to find a way to become His Majesty's people. You don't know who gave you the order? Shen Yu asked. I don't know. He has always sent us messages through the palace servants. He has never seen us in person. Who are the palace servants who sent you messages? Little Gizi, Aunt Fan, Magpie. Shen Yu silently remembered these names. Then do you know who else listens to his orders like you? Concubine Yu reported a few names. Shen Yu and Shang Junlin looked at each other. Their eyes were a little dignified. Lin Jilan was not among the names that Concubine Yu had revealed. What does Gui Jun think? After ordering people to take Concubine Yu away, Shang Junlin asked. Either Concubine Yu doesn't know of Lin Jilan's existence, or the person behind them is not the same person. Shen Yu was more inclined to the latter. His Majesty's Imperial Palace is really crouching tigers and hidden dragons. Shen Yu teased. Then I'll have to trouble Gui Jun to give me a clean Imperial Palace. Shang Junlin pinched Shen Yu's cheek. Shen Yu covered his face, not letting Shang Junlin succeed. Is there any progress on His Majesty's side? Lin Jilan revealed some information, but it's not enough to catch the person behind the scenes. Because Shen Yu was involved in this matter from the beginning, Shang Junlin did not intend to hide it from him. First catch the person that Concubine Yu pointed out. Maybe there is some connection between the two. After thinking about it, Shen Yu suggested. What Gui Jun said is reasonable. Shang Junlin took out a waist token. This is for Gui Jun. If you have any orders for the hidden dragon guards, you can use this token. The token was pitch black with a dark red pattern engraved on it. Shen Yu took it and touched it. There were small uneven characters on the back, but he could not recognize the characters. Why did His Majesty suddenly give me this? Since Gui Jun helped me, I have to show my gratitude. At most, I can mobilize a team of hidden dragon guards. Gui Jun can accept it without worry. Shang Junlin had other things to do, so he left after giving instructions. When he returned to the bedroom, Shen Yu took out the pitch-black token and looked at it carefully. He didn't expect Shang Junlin to give him the token that could command the hidden dragon guards so easily. Shen Yu's mood was a little complicated. However, he did not have much time to think about this. He still had to deal with the trouble that Concubine Yu brought. According to the information that Concubine Yu revealed about the other people, Shen Yu ordered the hidden dragon guards to investigate. These people did not have the same thing that happened to Concubine Yu. This was good news. It meant that the infiltration of the person behind the scenes was much lower than he had imagined. The hidden dragon guards acted quickly. It did not take long for them to find the suspicious person in Concubine Yu's courtyard. As Shen Yu expected, it was a little eunuch who had been serving in the side courtyard. Shen Yu did not spend much time to meet this person. He believed that the hidden dragon guards would be able to get some useful information from this person. Everything was done in secret. Luckily, Concubine Yu's courtyard was remote. Not many people felt the commotion. After Shen Yu gave the order, no one dared to say a word. Ever since Shang Junlin's purge, the connections between the inside and outside of the palace were cut off. Aristocratic families like the Zhong family who dared to interfere in the palace were punished. The remaining families who were lucky enough not to be discovered hid and did not dare to show their faces. If it weren't for Noble Lord catching them off guard and locking them up in Yuzhang Palace, the person behind the scenes wouldn't have revealed himself. Shang Junlin held the black chess piece in his hand and blocked the white chess piece's way out. Your Majesty, have you found out anything? Shen Yu thought for a while and put down the white chess piece. Your chess skills have really opened my eyes. On the chessboard, the black pieces and the white pieces fought fiercely. Shang Junlin's moves were wide open, while Shen Yu's moves were unpredictable. Every step he took was filled with murderous intent. The situation on the chessboard was constantly changing, and the slightest carelessness would lead to the loss of the entire game. I have already made a contribution. Why doesn't Your Majesty know how to let me win? Shen Yu held the white chess piece and complained. The chess piece made of white jade was held between the young man's slender fingers. It was hard to say whether the jade or the hand was more beautiful. Shang Junlin's gaze followed the young man's fingers. Suddenly, it was as if he had become the chess piece. Your Majesty, you have lost. A clear voice pulled Shang Junlin back to reality. He looked at Shen Yu's chess piece that turned the situation around. He could not help but laugh. I admit defeat. Your Majesty seems to be in a good mood today. Shen Yu took the hot drink brought by Mushi and took a sip. He narrowed his eyes in satisfaction. Why do you think so? Shang Junlin looked away from the chessboard. Today, I won against Your Majesty by cheating, but I don't see Your Majesty getting angry. Shen Yu held the small bowl. The steam rising from the bowl made his eyes hazy and charming. Shang Junlin laughed. When have I ever been angry with you? Shen Yu thought for a while. It seemed that ever since he entered the palace, Shang Junlin had never been angry with him. He changed the topic. Mushi, bring a bowl of hot drink for His Majesty. Let His Majesty try the new product developed by Yuzhong Palace's small kitchen. Mushi quickly brought a bowl. Shen Yu liked to drink this recently, so the small kitchen always prepared it. Shang Junlin had never been picky about food. He took a sip and commented, not bad. It seems that it's really good to be able to get Your Majesty's praise. Shen Yu finished drinking and put the small bowl aside. Prepare a bowl for His Majesty in the future. Mushi noted it down. Shang Junlin slowly finished drinking and said, that little eunuch knows a lot of things. Shen Yu, Your Majesty, please say it. Shang Junlin, there is a huge network of relationships in the palace. It has existed since the late emperor was on the throne. It has developed to the present, and it involves a lot of people in the palace. However, most of them are just following orders. They don't know who they are loyal to. Only a few people know the identity of that person. The little eunuch caught by Yuzhong Palace happened to know. Shen Yu, he is a core member. Shang Junlin, not really. He knows this because his master told him. Shen Yu, master? Who is his master? Shang Junlin, he is the original head eunuch of Yuzhong Palace. Shen Yu finally understood why the person behind the scenes had chosen this little eunuch to make a move. After experiencing Shang Junlin's 2 purges, it would only be more difficult to plant people in Yuzhong Palace than in other places. Perhaps the little eunuch was the only choice. Has that eunuch been dealt with? Yes, the first investigation led to him. He works for more than one person. Shang Junlin just didn't expect that there was another person hiding in the dark. Your Majesty, who is it? It's Prince Huayu. Shang Junlin's eyes deepened. Prince Huayu? The Prince Huayu who claimed to be ill after losing the fight for the throne with the late emperor? Shen Yu thought for a moment. In the memory of his previous life, there wasn't much about this person. Until Prince Yu ascended the throne, this person was holed up in his mansion and didn't make any moves. Yes. Shang Junlin frowned. Before the late emperor ascended the throne, Prince Huayu was the most popular candidate for the new emperor. But for some reason, he chose to withdraw voluntarily. After the late emperor ascended the throne, he was allowed to stay in the capital to treat his illness. Shen Yu, this is understandable. Rather than letting the tiger return to the mountain, it's better to keep an eye on it. After all, it's someone who almost ascended the throne. What do you think I should do? Didn't Your Majesty already make a decision? Shen Yu looked at him. There was an unspoken tacit understanding in their eyes. Prince Huayu's mansion. A thin man was half leaning on a short table. Opposite him was a middle-aged man with a white face and no beard. His voice was slightly shrill. Your Highness has been exposed. What are your plans next? Isn't this what your master wants to see? Why are you asking me? Prince Huayu's voice was hoarse. He didn't have a good impression of the man. Master asked me to give this to you. He said that you will understand his intentions when you see it. A dark red box was placed on the table. Knowing that he wasn't welcome, the middle-aged man didn't stay any longer. He got up and left. After a long time, hoarse laughter came from the room. Shortly after the middle-aged man left, a team of well-trained imperial guards surrounded the not-so-luxurious Prince Huayu mansion. In the evening, Shen Yu finished copying 2 pages of a book before Shang Junlin came. The news outside the palace had already spread to the palace. The palace people involved had been secretly taken away. Some people with keen political senses sensed that a storm was coming. Why hasn't Gui Jun gone to bed yet? Shang Junlin came back late today. Usually, at this time, Shen Yu would have been lying in bed. I'm waiting for your majesty. After getting rid of the cold air, Shang Junlin approached Shen Yu. What are you doing? Copying books. Shen Yu moved to the side to make room for Shang Junlin. Has your majesty finished? Almost. Shang Junlin sat down next to Shen Yu. After finding out the person behind the scenes, Shang Junlin immediately controlled the palace people on the list to prevent them from spreading the news to the outside world. Then, he ordered the imperial guards to go to Prince Huayu Mansion to arrest them. After this time, those who want to send their children into the palace or give His Majesty people should stop. Shen Yu sighed softly as he thought of the things that had happened in the past few days. There are always people who don't give up. Shang Junlin picked up the book that Shen Yu copied and looked at it. Instead of being promoted honestly, there are more people who want to take shortcuts. Your Majesty is so charming. Guijun is wrong. What's charming is the power that I represent. Even if Your Majesty isn't the Emperor, I believe that with Your Majesty's charm, there are still many people who want to be with Your Majesty. Shen Yu changed the topic and looked at Shang Junlin sadly. Your Majesty, is there really no one else but me? Genius 1 second. Remember this website, www.bk50. CC Literature Mobile Version Website, mbk50. cc. Chapter 26. The force on Shen Yu's chin continued to increase. His lips curled. Is Your Majesty angry? I'm just reminding you not to forget your identity. Shang Junlin narrowed his eyes slightly. Then, Shen Yu dragged out his words. Your Majesty, please tell me, what is my identity? Don't ask when you already know the answer. How did Your Majesty know what I said? Shen Yu rolled his eyes. Does Your Majesty care about me that much? The palace can't hide secrets. Your conversation with Prince Yu has been heard by many people. Shang Junlin stated the truth. No wonder Prince Li used that to threaten me. Shen Yu understood this point. He reached out and covered the back of Shang Junlin's hand. If Your Majesty is curious about my experience outside the palace, you can ask me directly. There's no need to hear it from other people. Shang Junlin's eyes deepened. Then why don't you tell me how many good young masters you have outside the palace, Chim? After going around in circles, the topic returned to the original point. Why did Your Majesty believe my words to fool Prince Yu? Other than Your Majesty, I don't have any good young masters. Isn't Your Majesty very clear on this point? Shen Yu didn't believe that Shang Junlin hadn't investigated him before he entered the palace. You're right. Shang Junlin didn't deny it. He loosened his grip on Shen Yu's chin and frowned. Why is Your Majesty so delicate? Shang Junlin purposely used less force. He didn't expect that it would still leave a red mark on Shen Yu's chin. Meng Chang, bring the medicine. Yes. Eunuch Meng quickly came back with the medicine. Shen Yu rubbed his chin. In fact, he didn't feel anything. Your Majesty, don't worry about it. It'll be fine in a while. Shang Junlin didn't listen to him. He opened the medicine bottle and held Shen Yu's chin with one hand. He dabbed the ointment on his fingers with the other hand and carefully applied it to the red mark. A cool and refreshing feeling came from his chin. The man rubbed the ointment bit by bit with his fingertips, and the coolness gradually turned into heat. Shen Yu was controlled between the man's body and the wall. The biting cold breath and the heat of the man's body continuously attacked her, making her dizzy. Shen Yu slowly closed his eyes, and his chaotic thoughts gradually calmed down. All right. Just before her consciousness slipped into the abyss, she heard the man's voice. Shen Yu opened her eyes and found that she was even closer to Shang Junlin. The distance between the two of them was less than an arm's length. They were so close that he could see Shang Junlin's long and straight eyelashes. Every strand of his eyelashes could be clearly seen. As their breaths intertwined, Shen Yu's ears heated up. You have a mole here. Shang Junlin's voice was low and hoarse. Below her earlobe, there was a very light-colored mole. Shang Junlin couldn't resist touching it with his finger. Shen Yu turned his head uncomfortably, trying to avoid Shang Junlin's hand, and reached out to touch her ear at the same time. He didn't know that the place where he had a mole was so sensitive. Just being touched by Shang Junlin made her tremble as if she had touched a switch. Your Majesty. Feeling the unconcealable tremor in her voice, Shen Yu closed her mouth. Shang Junlin coughed and withdrew his hand. It's late. You should rest early. Under the wide sleeves, the man rubbed his fingers, and the delicate and cool touch seemed to remain on his fingertips. Shen Yu lay on the bed, slightly tilting his head. Under the candlelight, Shang Junlin was reading memorials with a straight posture. The orange candlelight cast a warm glow on the man, making it hard for people to look away. Tonight was destined to be a sleepless night. Prince Huayu was suddenly taken away. The ministers had just heard the news, but they were confused by the emperor's series of actions. The imperial guards took away several officials without saying anything, including but not limited to the old ministers who had been in power during the time of the previous emperor. This time, the action was even bigger than that of Censor Zhong. The ministers who had a good relationship with the emperor gathered together to think about the reason for His Majesty's actions. His Majesty punished Prince Li and Prince Yu, and now it's Prince Huayu. Could it be that Prince Huayu was disrespectful to His Majesty like the previous two princes? It shouldn't be. Prince Huayu's presence has always been very low, and he doesn't care about court affairs. Prince Li wants his niece to enter the palace as the empress, but I haven't heard of a young girl in Prince Huayu's family. His Majesty suddenly made a big move and directly sent the imperial guards to surround Prince Huayu's residence. I feel that it's not a small matter. Could it be a rebellion? Be careful with your words. In fact, it's not completely impossible. You may not know, but before the previous emperor ascended the throne, Prince Huayu was the most popular prince. The person who spoke was lost in his memories. At that time, Prince Huayu was only 17 or 18 years old. He was at the peak of his youth, and his talent was outstanding. He was very conspicuous among the princes. Unfortunately, after this dazzling star flickered for a short while, his light was covered by thick dark clouds and he was lost in the crowd. In a flash, many years had passed. The once favored sun had become the sand on the ground, and his elegance had also been worn away by time. But the new emperor has been on the throne for so long. If he really wanted to do something, he didn't have to wait until now. Another person put forward a different opinion. Yes, now that the court is stable, and His Majesty has the support of the people. If it's really as you say, before His Majesty ascended the throne, wouldn't it be a better time to act? Many of the ministers present had personally experienced the chaotic scene during that time. The previous emperor was muddle-headed in his later years, and favored the treacherous ministers, allowing them to control the court, amass wealth wantonly, and eliminate dissidents. Capable generals were framed, and millions of soldiers died in vain, dying with hatred. The enemy countries found the right time to launch a large-scale attack, and took away piece after piece of rich land. The previous emperor only cared about enjoying himself, and turned a blind eye to this until the current emperor appeared out of nowhere. Like a sharp knife, he directly stabbed into the enemy's abdomen, and took back the land bit by bit. Shen Yu flipped through the palace chronicle sent by Shang Junlin, trying to find some clues from it. Shen Yu didn't know what happened to Prince Huayu in his previous life. He didn't know how Shang Junlin dealt with the previous emperor's concubines in his previous life, and whether he also found out that someone was secretly manipulating behind the scenes. He always felt that there was something wrong with this matter. Gui Jun, Imperial Physician Ji Yu is here. After Shen Yu's health improved, Imperial Physician Ji Yu didn't come every day. This time, it had been 3 days since the last time he came. After greeting, Imperial Physician Ji Yu took Shen Yu's pulse as usual. After a while, Imperial Physician Ji Yu frowned and withdrew his hand. Guijuan's pulse doesn't seem right. Shen Yu didn't respond, but Mu Shi was already anxious. She couldn't care about anything else and hurriedly asked, Imperial Physician Ji Yu, is Guijuan's body okay? I have to confirm. Miss Mu Shi, don't panic. It's not necessarily a bad thing. Imperial Physician Ji Yu said. Mu Shi. Mu Shi still wanted to say something, but she was interrupted by Shen Yu. Don't be rude to Imperial Physician Ji Yu. Please extend your other hand, Gui Jun, I have to confirm it again. Imperial Physician Ji Yu thought for a moment and said. Thank you, Imperial Physician Ji Yu. Imperial physician Gu carefully took Shen Yu's pulse twice, and his tightly knitted brows relaxed a little. Don't worry, Guijuan's body has a rejection reaction to some kind of poison. Fortunately, Guijun didn't ingest much. I can give you a prescription, and you'll be fine soon. Poisoned? Mu Shi frowned. But Guijuan's diet is strictly controlled. This servant can guarantee that everything that enters Guijuan's mouth is fine. It's not necessarily food, Imperial physician Gu explained. The poison in Guijuan's body is very weak. If Guijun wasn't born with a weak body, and if the medicine he took didn't conflict with this poison, this little bit of poison wouldn't have any effect on his body. Can Imperial physician Gu diagnose when I ingested this poison? Shen Yu recalled his experience during this period of time, and a certain idea came to his mind. It should be within a week. Within a week, it just happened to match the time Shen Yu thought. The only strange thing that happened recently was that he went there after Consort Yu caused trouble. Coincidentally, Mu Shi was his personal maidservant, so she also followed him there. I'll have to trouble Imperial physician Gu to diagnose my maidservant again. Shen Yu needed to confirm his thoughts. After Imperial physician Gu finished checking Mu Shi's pulse, he was surprised. Miss Mu Shi also has a very small amount of this poison in her body. Sure enough, it was as he thought. Shen Yu continued to ask, what effect does this poison have on people? It has a certain hallucinogenic effect. If the dosage is large enough, it will make people fall into a nightmare. But Guijun can rest assured that the amount of poison in your body won't have any effect. Shen Yu also felt it. If Imperial physician Gu didn't say it, he wouldn't have known that he was inadvertently poisoned. Can I trouble Imperial physician Gu to take a look at His Majesty? This is my duty. I don't dare to accept the word trouble. Shang Junlin finished his work and returned to Yuzhong Palace. When he saw Imperial physician Gu talking to Shen Yu in a low voice, the corners of his mouth slowly flattened. Shen Yu saw Shang Junlin before the palace servant announced his arrival. He stood up. Your Majesty, come here quickly. Imperial physician Gu and the palace servant knelt down to greet him. Shang Junlin walked towards Shen Yu. Everyone, get up. Your Majesty, I found something. Shen Yu told him his guess. Your Majesty, let Imperial physician Gu take your pulse first. Shang Junlin's expression became serious. He stretched out his hand to let Imperial physician Gu take his pulse. The result was as expected. Shang Junlin also had a trace amount of poison left in his body. Your Majesty. Shang Junlin's face instantly became very ugly. Shen Yu was about to explain that a little bit of poison wouldn't have much effect on the body when he heard the man ask Imperial physician Gu in a deep voice, will this poison cause harm to Guijuan's body? Imperial physician Gu was also stunned. He didn't expect Shang Junlin to ask this question after learning that he was poisoned. Imperial physician Gu once again sighed at His Majesty's deep affection for Guijun. He calmed down and explained, Your Majesty, don't worry. It won't affect Guijuan's body. Shang Junlin nodded and his face returned to normal. What's the name of the poison? It's called Fei Meng. Fei Meng. Wasn't Fei Meng banned? Shen Yu blurted out. Because of his own body, Shen Yu had a certain degree of research on all kinds of drugs. He had a deep impression of Fei Meng because in his previous life, someone had used this seemingly inconspicuous Fei Meng to almost destroy a city. After saying this, Shen Yu suddenly realized that when he was reborn, that shocking incident hadn't happened yet. Fei Meng hadn't been banned yet. Right now, Fei Meng was just an inconspicuous drug. Shang Junlin slightly narrowed his eyes. He had heard of Fei Meng before. It wasn't a drug that was worth paying attention to. It was usually paired with other drugs and used for pleasure. Why did Shen Yu have such a big reaction to Fei Meng? Did he experience something, or Shang Junlin suppressed the various thoughts in his heart and ordered people to thoroughly investigate Yuzhong Palace? Your Majesty, Shen Yu grabbed Shang Junlin's hand, we must find out where Fei Meng came from. Shang Junlin looked deeply at him. We need a reason. Genius 1 second. Remember this website, www.bk50. CC Literature Mobile Version Reading Website, mbk50. CC. Chapter 27. Shun Yu fell silent. After this period of time, he had a new understanding of Shang Junlin. However, the matter of his rebirth had a wide range of implications. Other than himself, he did not intend to let anyone else know about this secret. He knew that he had revealed too much to Shang Junlin. If Shang Junlin did not pursue the matter, he would pretend that Shang Junlin did not discover anything. This was the case with young Master He and the matter with Fei Meng. Shang Junlin sighed and stroked Shun Yu's cheek. "We can ignore other matters, but you must tell us what kind of harm Fei Meng will bring." "Your Majesty." Shun Yu raised his head. His face was so small that Shang Junlin could hold it with one hand. At this moment, the young man's face had a trace of disbelief. He looked like a kitten that had caused trouble but was not punished. "Does your Majesty think that we are someone who will get to the bottom of things regardless of other people's wishes?" Shang Junlin raised his eyebrows. "Of course not, Your Majesty." Shun Yu steadied his mind. The matter with Fei Meng may seem a little unimaginable. When Shun Yu found out the truth in his previous life, the disbelief in his heart had almost reached its peak. Who would have thought that such an unremarkable medicine could have such a terrifying effect? Fei Meng is actually not something to be afraid of. What is truly impossible to guard against is another medicine that uses Fei Meng as the raw material. Just like Fei Meng, this medicine is colorless and tasteless. Just a little bit is enough to make a strong man fall ill with fever. Anyone who comes into contact with fever will be infected in a very short period of time. At most, they will die after 7 days. In his previous life, this matter happened after a natural disaster. At first, Shun Yu, like everyone else, thought that it was a plague after the natural disaster. It was only later that he found out that the plague was fake and real. It was also at that time that Fei Meng was listed as a forbidden medicine by the imperial court. Unfortunately, Shun Yu was in King Yu's fief at that time and did not know much about the inside story. Before Fei Meng was discovered, Shun Yu did not know how many plagues were man-made. "I will get the hidden dragon guards to investigate." Shang Junlin frowned. Shun Yu didn't know whether Shang Junlin believed his words completely. But when Shang Junlin said that he would investigate, Shun Yu felt relieved. Maybe the person behind the scenes hadn't made a move yet. It was worth it to kill this kind of thing in advance. Shun Yu borrowed some medical books from Imperial Physician Gu. The books that he usually used to pass the time became all kinds of medical books. It was said that long-term illness made one a doctor. Because of his body, Shun Yu had done some research on medical skills. He was not as good as Imperial Physician Gu, who had been influenced by him since he was young. He still knew some simple medical principles. Shun Yu's actions were not hidden from the others. Shang Junlin soon found out that Shun Yu was interested in medicine. He paused for a moment and asked, "Were you interested in medicine when you were in Zhunbei Marquis' residence?" "Your Majesty, according to the information obtained by the hidden dragon guards, you learned a lot when you were in Zhunbei Marquis' residence. You also dabbled in medicine." Eunuch Meng replied respectfully, "I understand." When Shang Junlin returned to Yuzhong Palace, Shun Yu was flipping through a medical book. The young man sat under the window. The sunlight poured in from the window and cast a hazy halo on the young man. His jade-like face was hidden behind a white fur collar. He looked delicate and charming. "Are you still worried about Fei Meng?" Shang Junlin walked over and sat beside Shun Yu. "Not all of them. I borrowed some medical books from Imperial Physician Gu some time ago. I have to finish reading them." Shun Yu pointed at a few thick books on the desk and showed them to Shang Junlin. Shang Junlin picked them up and flipped through them. He found that there were many interesting stories about treating illnesses. Rather than calling them medical books, they were more like medical books. "Have you finished reading the previous books?" "Yes, Your Majesty, there are too few books in the library." Strictly speaking, there were too few books that could be used to pass the time. Some books were related to sensitive topics, so Shun Yu wouldn't take them out to read. "What kind of books do you like? I'll have someone go out of the palace and buy them for you." Shang Junlin knew that he couldn't stay any longer and suggested, "Why don't you accompany me to the Imperial study to write memorials?" "No." Shun Yu suddenly pounced in front of Shang Junlin and reached out to cover his mouth, The ministers are already very dissatisfied with me. Does your majesty want to accuse me of bringing disaster to the country and the people? You're obviously worried about the country and the people. Shang Junlin's eyes were filled with a smile. Your majesty, don't try to flatter me. I'll help your majesty with the government affairs. It's better to read these medical books than to read memorials. Maybe one day I'll be able to save the dying and heal the injured. Shun Yu leaned on Shang Junlin's body, his tone full of disdain for the government affairs. Others can't get this opportunity even if they beg for it. You really don't regret it? Shang Junlin deliberately tempted him. Shun Yu sat up with his hands on the man's chest. Your majesty, don't fool me. What's so good about reading memorials? It's better to read your majesty. In his previous life, Shun Yu racked his brains for more than 10 years for the king of Yu. He went through ups and downs in the officialdom and was almost executed in exchange. In this life, he didn't want to be involved in the political struggle at all. I only hope that your majesty will become stronger and stronger and can always protect me. Shun Yu lowered his head and looked at Shang Junlin. His clear eyes were filled with seriousness. Shang Junlin couldn't help but be attracted by those eyes. Shun Yu's eyes seemed to have some kind of magical power. As long as he wanted to, he could make people sink into his eyes and be unable to extricate themselves. Rest assured, your majesty. I will protect you well. Shun Yu smiled. The smile in his eyes slowly spread. His eyebrows curved slightly and his entire face became more and more lively. Shun Yu's appearance was already very outstanding. When he smiled, people couldn't take their eyes off of him. Shang Junlin handed the matter of Fei Meng to the hidden dragon guards to investigate. Regardless of whether Shun Yu was telling the truth or not, before they found out the truth, they shouldn't act rashly and alert the enemy. Other than the hidden dragon guards, Shang Junlin also handed the matter of Fei Meng to Imperial Physician Ji Yu. Imperial Physician Ji Yu didn't know the terrifying truth behind Fei Meng. He only thought that the emperor was worried about your majesty's health. The higher-ups didn't spread the news that both the emperor and your majesty were affected by Fei Meng at the same time. Imperial Physician Ji Yu understood the meaning behind this and didn't tell anyone about Fei Meng. There were too many people in the Imperial Hospital. Some things weren't suitable to be done in the Imperial Hospital, so Imperial Physician Ji Yu brought them home. The Ji Yu residence was a house with 3 entrances and 3 exits. It wasn't very big, but it was more than enough for Imperial Physician Ji Yu and Ji Yu Huai to live in. Imperial Physician Gu's home had a specialized pharmacy. The working environment wasn't worse than in the Imperial Hospital, but the herbs and equipment weren't as complete as in the Imperial Hospital. Ji Yu Huai, help me move this cabinet. Hearing the gentle voice of the young man who was practicing martial arts in the courtyard quickly stopped and ran into the house. Imperial Physician Ji Yu was wearing a light grey gown. His hands weren't empty as he was preparing medicine. Ji Yu Huai walked in and looked around the house. He accurately found the cabinet that Imperial Physician Ji Yu wanted to move and walked over without saying anything. Brother, where should I move the cabinet? Here, Imperial Physician Ji Yu signaled with his eyes. Also, help me take out the box on the left of the cabinet. Ji Yu Huai followed Imperial Physician Gu's instructions. He carried the box and walked to Imperial Physician Gu's side. Brother, what have you been busy with recently? You don't even have time to accompany me. Xiao Huai, you're almost as tall as brother. Why do you still need an adult to accompany you? Imperial Physician Ji Yu teased and returned to business. Put the box on the table here, and then help me take this. Ji Yu Huai put down the small box in his hands and took the medicine from Imperial Physician Gu's hands. He asked curiously, Brother, are you preparing some new medicine? The tip of his nose twitched as he sniffed. Why is there no smell? Hey, be careful. Fortunately, Imperial Physician Ji Yu had prepared many antidotes for Fei Meng over the past few days. He hurriedly fed them to Ji Yu Huai. I've told you before that you shouldn't touch or smell anything in this room. Ji Yu Huai obediently took the antidote and blinked. I'm sorry, brother. I was wrong. Imperial Physician Ji Yu didn't really get angry at his good attitude. He helplessly said, Fortunately, You didn't touch anything poisonous this time. Don't do it again next time. Seeing Jiyu Huai obediently nod, Imperial Physician Jiyu continued to explain. This is Fei Meng. It's colorless and odorless, so you won't be able to smell it. Fei Meng. Jiyu Huai's expression changed. A dark light flashed through his eyes, but he quickly returned to normal. Brother, why are you studying Fei Meng? Children shouldn't care so much. Imperial Physician Jiyu poked his forehead. All right, put the things here and go play by yourself. Jiyu Huai did his best to act as normal as possible and obediently left the room. Imperial Physician Jiyu didn't think too much about it and continued to busy himself with the things at hand. Jiyu Huai walked all the way to the training field. His expression grew darker and darker. He didn't know who ordered his brother to study Fei Meng, but if he found out who it was, he definitely wouldn't let that person have an easy time. Master. A man dressed in black silently knelt down. Fei Meng is now in my brother's hands. Go investigate and find out what happened. If Imperial Physician Jiyu was here, he would realize that Jiyu Huai didn't look like the usual obedient young man in front of him. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that he looked like an evil spirit that had returned from hell. After more than 10 years, he finally found a clue about Fei Meng. He would definitely take revenge for the blood feud from back then. What did you say? Shun Yu stood up and asked in disbelief. When the late emperor was still on the throne, there were people who used such methods to eliminate dissidents. Shang Junlin's eyes turned black. I didn't expect that the hidden dragon guards would be able to uncover such a big old case. How much has your majesty found out? Only a rough estimate. If I hadn't listened to your majesty and investigated Fei Meng, I'm afraid that the truth would never have been known to the world. Shang Junlin's voice was full of oppression. The lives of hundreds of thousands of soldiers didn't disappear on the battlefield, but disappeared because of the selfish desires of their own people. How laughable. If I find out who planned all of this, I won't let them off easily. Shang Junlin's voice was filled with murderous intent. Your Majesty will definitely redress the grievances of these wronged soldiers. Your Majesty, don't be angry. Shun Yu could more or less understand Shang Junlin's anger. Shang Junlin ascended to the throne by virtue of his military exploits. For a long time, he lived in the army and ate and lived with the soldiers. If there was anything in this world that could touch him, it would probably be the soldiers who had accompanied him for more than 10 years. How dare they? Shang Junlin's chest heaved up and down. I knew that the late emperor was muddle-headed, but I didn't expect that he would allow such things to happen again and again, Your Majesty. Shun Yu didn't know how to comfort him. At this moment, Shang Junlin was like a wolf that had lost its pack. He was lonely and desperate. Genius 1 second. Remember this website, www.bk50. CC Literature Mobile Version Website, mbk50. CC. Chapter 28. Shun Yu let Shang Junlin hold him in his arms and did not speak. Strictly speaking, this was the first time they were so close to each other. The man's arms were so strong that Shun Yu could even feel the pain from his waist. He was painfully aware that he was needed at this moment. He couldn't tell what he was thinking, or maybe he wasn't thinking at all. The man's breath wrapped around him from all directions. Zhongyong occupied all the gaps between him and the outside world. That moment was both long and short. After an unknown period of time, Shang Junlin slowly released his arms. I forgot myself. Shun Yu didn't continue the previous topic. He knew that some things could only be slowly digested by himself. The forceful intervention of outsiders would only aggravate the pain. Your Majesty, you hurt me just now. Shun Yu half leaned on Shang Junlin and breathed slowly to ease the pain from his waist. I'll apply medicine for you. Shang Junlin was also familiar with this task. There was a small compartment at the head of the bed. It was full of medicine for promoting blood circulation and removing blood stasis, as well as some unknown ointment sent by the Imperial Hospital. It's not that serious. Shun Yu pressed down on Shang Junlin's hand. Your Majesty, is there a result on Prince Huayu's matter? Shang Junlin, he confessed very quickly, but I still feel that something is wrong. Shun Yu, Your Majesty and I have the same idea. Shang Junlin, oh? What does Your Majesty think? Doesn't Your Majesty think it's too easy? Shun Yu pulled Shang Junlin to sit on the soft couch. According to Your Majesty's original statement, Prince Huayu has been hiding in the palace for so long without being discovered. It doesn't make sense for him to be exposed so easily. Shang Junlin nodded. There are many doubts about Prince Huayu's matter, and the time span is also long. I haven't dealt with him yet. Prince Huayu was locked up in a secret prison. Every day, there were special people to interrogate him. Unfortunately, no matter what method was used, the results were the same. Either he admitted it easily, or he refused to admit it. The more he was interrogated, the more doubts and loopholes there were. What about those women? Did you get anything out of them? After discovering the existence of Fei Meng, Shang Junlin had locked up the concubines of the previous emperor and empress who were originally placed in remote courtyards in Yuzhang Palace. Firstly, this was to prevent information from leaking out, and secondly, this was to cut off any opportunities for others to make a move. The answers are all about the same. The matter seemed to have been resolved, but in reality, there was no progress. From the information I have found, Prince Huayu is indeed one of the masterminds. The former emperor, the concubines, and some of the palace servants are indeed his spies in the palace, except for one person, Shang Junlin said, holding a teacup. Is it that little eunuch who attacked concubine Yu? Shun Yu guessed. If it wasn't for that little eunuch making a move and scaring Lady Yu wouldn't have asked him for help. Without Lady Yu's confession, they wouldn't have discovered Prince Huayu's existence so quickly. Shang Junlin, yes, this is the only loophole. That little eunuch pretended to be one of Prince Huayu's men, but we later found out that he had never done anything for Prince Huayu. So there is only one possibility left, and that is that he deliberately said this. Shun Yu, he deliberately put all the blame on Prince Huayu so that the real mastermind behind the scenes can escape. Shang Junlin, unfortunately, that little eunuch is dead and there is no evidence, so the clues are cut off. When Shang Junlin's people found that something was wrong and wanted to interrogate the little eunuch again, they found that he was already dead. He had committed suicide. This result confirmed Shang Junlin's thoughts. Prince Huayu's arrest caused quite a stir, and all the ministers and the imperial family heard the news. When they went to court, some ministers directly asked about it. Shang Junlin didn't intend to hide it and directly told them. He even sent a special official to take charge of this matter. Seeing that the matter was about to be solved, but turned into a dead end, the minister in charge of this case was so anxious that he had several bubbles in his mouth. The end of the year was approaching, and at this time, everyone should be on holiday at home. Now, let alone on holiday, everyone was afraid that they would be implicated in the matter in the palace. Didn't they see that several officials were implicated and lost their official titles? Count Zhenbei had always wanted to see Shen Yu, alone, without Shang Junlin by Shen Yu's side. Finally, he found an opportunity. It was at the palace banquet on New Year's Eve. With the previous example, no one dared to offend Shen Yu at the palace banquet this time. It was just that the palace banquet was long and boring. After the necessary procedures were completed, Shen Yu and Shang Junlin said goodbye and sneaked out. Shen Yu took Mu Shi and walked for a while. Seeing a figure in front of them, they stopped. Your Highness. The person came and saluted. Your Highness Princeton. Shen Yu was surprised. Why is Princeton here? Shen Yu deliberately walked further away. There was a distance from the hall where the palace banquet was held, and it was relatively close to the harem. If Princeton wanted to take a breather, he shouldn't come here. It's not easy for me to come to the palace, so I want to see the place where I used to play when I was young. Princeton explained calmly. It seems that someone is looking for you, so I won't disturb you. Princeton nodded and left. Shen Yu turned back and saw a man dressed as a servant walking towards him. Your Highness, the Marquis asked if you can see him. The servant had always been serving Count Zhenbei, and his attitude towards Shen Yu was very respectful. Father wants to see me. Shen Yu was bored and didn't want to go back to the hall for a while. Where is father? Your Highness, please come with this servant. Shen Yu walked a short distance with the servant and saw Count Zhenbei standing on the roadside. Father wants to see me. Shun Yu didn't plan to completely break the relationship with Count Shunbei for the time being. I never knew that it would be so difficult to see my own son. Count Shunbei was a little angry when he didn't get a reply from the palace. Shun Yu was puzzled. Father, what are you talking about? Didn't I go to the Count Shunbei's residence a while ago? I want to see you alone. I don't want you to bring His Majesty with you. Count Shunbei's face became ugly when he said this. Until now, there were still some people who didn't know the truth who thought that he was covering up for his son to meet his lover outside the palace. He couldn't say that it was His Majesty who came to the residence with Shun Yu that day, and there was no lover at all, so he could only swallow it and bear it. What is His Majesty thinking? Now there are rumors outside the palace that you have other people outside and are disloyal to His Majesty. Don't you plan to care about this? There's such a thing. Shun Yu really didn't know. He thought that this matter was used by Prince Li to threaten him. Did it spread out? Public opinion can confuse gold, Count Shunbei advised earnestly. Rumors can destroy a person. Don't take it lightly. I know, I'll deal with it. Count Shunbei came to me just for this. He almost said, if there's nothing else, don't waste my time. Shun Yu's indifferent tone almost made Count Shunbei fall over in anger. Did you listen to father's words? Now you can rely on His Majesty's favor and don't take these things seriously, but when His Majesty has a new person, there's no such possibility as you said. Shun Yu glanced at him. Instead of worrying about me, Count Shunbei should worry about your own backyard. Your good concubine Yu seems to have a lot of tricks. You. Count Shunbei was speechless. Okay, I won't talk about this. I came to ask you about Prince Huayu's matter and what His Majesty plans to do. Originally, Prince Huayu should have been executed before the new year, but Shang Junlin said that it was not appropriate to see blood before the new year, so it was delayed until now. Why didn't the Emperor give the order when the evidence was conclusive? Was it really as he said that it was not appropriate to see blood before the new year, or was there something else hidden in the case? No one could guess. Do you think that I, as a concubine, can know His Majesty's decision? Shun Yu looked at him and said seriously, since you're my father, I'll give you a reminder. If someone asked you to ask this question, you should try to stay away from that person in the future. If you want to ask it yourself, I can only warn you, if you have nothing to do with this matter, don't get involved. Whether you want to listen to me or not, father, you decide. Count Shunbei was shocked. He came to ask Shun Yu because someone had mentioned it to him. After listening to Shun Yu's words, he couldn't help but think carefully. Did that person deliberately say this to let him ask? In the tense political situation, one wrong step could lead to the loss of the whole game. A little carelessness could lead to the loss of one's life. Count Shunbei was not in the mood to continue talking with Shun Yu, so he hurriedly left. On the way back, Mu Shi was puzzled. Why did Gui Jun tell Count Shunbei this? Having served Shun Yu for so many years, Mu Shi knew better than anyone that Shun Yu didn't have much fatherly affection for Count Shunbei. Even if he had, it had been obliterated by big and small disappointments. Because my current identity is still the legitimate son of Count Shunbei. If Count Shunbei is too stupid and falls into someone else's trap, the first one to be implicated will be me. Before he completely drew a line with Count Shunbei's mansion, Shun Yu would never tolerate someone using Count Shunbei to plot against him. Ask someone to keep an eye on Count Shunbei's mansion. Shun Yu ordered lightly. Yes. Now was not the best time to draw a line. He still had to wait. Shun Yu smiled. He was not in a hurry. After the palace banquet, Shun Yu returned to Yuzhong Palace and changed into light clothes. Compared with the luxurious and cumbersome Gui Jun costume, Shun Yu preferred simple casual clothes. Gui Jun, Happy New Year. Shang Junlin took out the red envelope that he had already prepared. Is it for me? Shun Yu's voice had a trace of uncertainty. He was stunned for a moment before he took it under Shang Junlin's affirmative gaze. Shun Yu held the red envelope and only felt his palm was hot. I didn't prepare it for your majesty. What should I do? Mu Shi was responsible for distributing the servants' gifts. Shun Yu didn't ask, so naturally, he didn't prepare anything for Shang Junlin. I'll give it to you. You don't have to give it to me. That won't do. Shun Yu thought for a moment. I owe your majesty one. I'll make it up to your majesty next time. As you wish. Shang Junlin wasn't obsessed with gifts. Seeing Shen Yu put away the red envelope, Shang Junlin asked, there will be a fireworks festival today. Does your majesty want to go and take a look? Every year, Dahuan would hold a grand fireworks festival. On this day, the people of Dahuan would take their relatives and friends out to watch it. Shen Yu's eyes lit up. Can I go out of the palace? Shang Junlin, who originally planned to take Shen Yu to see on the city wall, was speechless. You want to go out of the palace to play? It is said that the fireworks festival outside the palace is very lively. Everyone will take their relatives and partners to watch it. Can your majesty accompany me? Genius 1 second. Remember this website, www.bk50. CC Literature Mobile Version Reading URL, mbk50. cc. Chapter 29. Shang Junlin agreed without hesitation. The two of them changed into ordinary clothes that concealed their identities. They brought eunuch Meng and the hidden dragon guards out of the palace. As soon as they left the palace, they felt a completely different atmosphere from the palace. Shen Yu lifted a corner of the curtain and looked outside. The streets were bustling with noise and excitement. There were families of 3 strolling in the crowd and couples snuggling together to enjoy the excitement. There were all kinds of small stalls on the street and the goods on the stalls were dazzling. It was overwhelming. People enjoyed the once-in-a-year fireworks festival with their friends and family. The small carriage separated the inside and outside of the carriage. Outside the carriage was the bustling world. Separated by a wall, Shen Yu seemed to feel the excitement of the outside world. He was focused on looking outside and did not notice that Shang Junlin, who was sitting beside him, was looking at him. The light outside the window shone on the young man's face. A sense of haziness and distance arose spontaneously. It was close at hand but also far away. Shang Junlin moved his fingers and suppressed the urge to pull the young man into his arms. Your Majesty, it's so lively. Shen Yu turned back and couldn't wait to share the joy with Shang Junlin. Yes. Shang Junlin looked away before the young man turned back. Do you like it? I like it. Shen Yu thought for a while and shook his head. If it's so lively every day, I don't think I can enjoy it. Shang Junlin, who was thinking about how to make the palace livelier, stopped thinking. Is there anything you want? Anything? Shen Yu asked excitedly. Shang Junlin nodded. Then your Majesty will have to pay for it. Your Majesty doesn't allow me to bring maids. I don't have a single copper coin. Shen Yu held his chin and looked at Shang Junlin. Sure. Shang Junlin was easy to talk to. There are a lot of things I want to buy. We think that we have more than enough money to raise a noble. The carriage didn't travel for long before it stopped at a slightly remote place. After Shang Junlin got off the carriage, he stretched out his hand to help Shen Yu get off the carriage. You don't have to call me Your Majesty outside. Shang Junlin helped Shen Yu tidy up his clothes. Your Majesty, what do you think I should call you? Husband? Or Lin? Shang Junlin looked up and met Shen Yu's smiling eyes. I think my husband is not bad. What do you think? I prefer to call Your Majesty Lin. There are countless people in this world who call you Your Majesty, but only I can call you Lin. Then I'll call you Guijun Au. After resting for a while, the two of them stepped into the bustling streets. In order to avoid being separated by the crowd, Shang Junlin always used one hand to protect Shen Yu. The two of them wore similar wide-sleeved robes. One was dark, and the other was light. Both of them had outstanding looks. As they walked in the crowd together, they attracted countless people's attention. Two young masters, please wait. Shen Yu and Shang Junlin were talking when they suddenly heard a woman's voice behind them. They stopped. The two of them turned around and saw two gorgeously dressed women walking towards them. Their faces were full of undisguised shyness. It was easy to imagine why they stopped them. Dahuan people were open-minded and didn't have many restrictions on women. If there was someone they liked, the bolder women would directly ask. Every year at this time, there would be many stories of women taking the initiative to make it happen. Many young men and women would look for their partners on this day. If everything went well, they could ask their families to propose marriage to the other party. What Shen Yu and the others encountered were two young girls who were more courageous. The distance between the two of them was getting closer and closer. Shen Yu was about to tease them when the man held her hand. Her 5 fingers were separated from Shen Yu's hand. The man's fingers with distinct joints weaved into Shen Yu's, and their fingers were tightly intertwined. Shen Yu moved her hand. Instead of being released, her hand was held even tighter. "Your Majesty?" Shen Yu asked in a low voice. "A U is wrong." Shang Junlin calmly corrected her. Under the cover of the wide sleeves, their intertwined hands shouldn't be seen. Shang Junlin moved, and the people walking towards them happened to see their intertwined fingers. The two women looked at each other and saw the awkwardness in each other's eyes. They originally thought that the two young masters were good-looking and had an extraordinary temperament, so they wanted to see if they had a chance. They didn't expect the two of them to be a couple. "Sorry, we were rude." The slightly older woman resisted the awkwardness and said. The other person saw the situation and quickly said, "We're really sorry to disturb the two young masters. We wish the two of you happiness." "It's fine," Shen Yu said with a smile. "I wish the two of you find a good man soon." After making such a big mistake, the two couldn't stay any longer and hurriedly left. "Ha ha ha ha," Shen Yu laughed and fell on Shang Junlin. "How did a Lin think of a way to make those two retreat? Could it be that a Yu wants to talk to those two women?" Shang Junlin was displeased. "A Lin, don't slander me. It's all a Lin's fault for being too ostentatious." Shen Yu restrained her smile and pushed the blame to Shang Junlin. "A Yu should reflect on herself before saying that. Am I too ostentatious or is a Yu too attractive?" There was a stall selling masks in front of them. Shen Yu pulled Shang Junlin forward and chose a wolf mask and a fox mask. She put the wolf mask on Shang Junlin's face. "This way, others won't see it." The other fox mask was put on by Shen Yu. The mask could only cover the upper half of the face. Under the mask, the man's sharp jawline could be seen. It didn't seem to have much effect. Shen Yu raised her eyebrows and looked at the man whose face was covered. The black mask gave the man a strange sense of mystery. His deep eyes were hidden behind the mask, dangerous and charming. Shang Junlin was also looking at Shen Yu. He always knew that Shen Yu was a very beautiful person. That kind of beauty blurred the boundaries of gender. It was a gentleness that didn't belong to a woman. It was flamboyant and full of aggression. As long as he wanted, he could make people fall in love with him. At this moment, the young man was wearing a fox mask that covered the upper half of his face. The mask was white with a pattern outlined in red. The existence of the mask didn't block the young man's charm. Instead, it added a different kind of charm to him. Shang Junlin suddenly regretted bringing Shen Yu out. There were only 2 women in front of them. How many of them would be spying on them in the dark? This little episode didn't affect Shen Yu's mood. Buying the mask seemed to have turned on some kind of switch. Shen Yu pulled Shang Junlin and swept through all the stalls. In a short while, Shen Yu had collected a lot of trophies, including food, toys, and necessities. Shen Yu stopped when they passed by a stall that sold sugar figurines. "Lin, do you want to eat sugar figurines?" Without waiting for Shang Junlin to answer, Shen Yu had already walked in front of the stall. "What do you want, young master?" "Flying in the sky, running on the ground, swimming in the water. As long as you want, I can make it for you." Shen Yu stood in front of the stall and looked at it for a while without speaking. "If you want to make sugar figurines for yourself and this Lang Jun, this old man can also make sugar figurines." The sugar figurines seller's eyes were very sharp. At a glance, he could see that the 2 young masters with masks had a deep relationship. Hearing this, Shen Yu became interested. "Lin, come here quickly. This old man said that he can make sugar figurines for us." Shang Junlin walked over helplessly. Shen Yu pointed at Shang Junlin and then himself. He said to the sugar figurine seller, "Can you make 2 little people according to us, a wolf and a fox?" "Of course. Please wait for a moment, Langjuns." Shen Yu and Shang Junlin stood aside and watched the vendor make sugar figurines. It was a very magical experience to watch the sugar figurines in the vendor's hands take shape little by little. "Sorry to keep you waiting, Langjuns. Here are your sugar figurines. There were a total of 4 sugar figurines. Shun Yu reached out to take his little man, but Shang Junlin took it first. Shang Junlin took the sugar figurines from the vendor's hands and handed his little man and wolf figurines to Shun Yu. Shun Yu was confused. Why did Lin give himself to me? You don't like it? Shang Junlin took the opportunity to take back his hands. Shun Yu quickly took it. I like it. There are 4 sugar figurines. Lin can't take all of them. Shun Yu didn't care who he ate. It was all sugar figurines. It was fine as long as they were delicious. This is the first time I ate sugar figurines. Shun Yu took Shang Junlin's little man and wolf figurines and bit off half of the wolf's head. Oh, it's delicious. Lin, try it. Seeing Shang Junlin staring at the sugar figurines without saying anything, Shun Yu urged him. Shang Junlin slowly ate Shun Yu's little man. Shun Yu was dissatisfied. I always leave our Lin's little one for last. Why did our Lin eat my little one first? Little men are more cute. Really? Foxes and wolves are also very cute. Speaking of which, this sugar figurine vendor's skills are really good. The figurines and small animals were all very lifelike. If you like, you can invite the vendor to your house. Shang Junlin didn't seem to care. Invite him back. Wasn't that the same as bringing him back to the palace? Shun Yu was startled by Shang Junlin's words. He said half-truthfully, Lin, you can't indulge me like this. You will spoil me. Your heart is like a mirror. How can you be spoiled by me? Shang Junlin used his free hand to pinch Shun Yu's cheek. When the young man ate the sugar figurines, his cheeks were puffed up. It looked very easy to pinch. Lin is really... Shun Yu got rid of the annoying hand and said softly, there are some things that I can't guarantee. The two of them walked and strolled. With the misunderstanding of the 2 women from before, Shang Junlin kept his arm around Shun Yu's waist. The 2 of them had an intimate posture, and no one rashly came forward to strike up a conversation. There was still some time before the fireworks were set off. Shun Yu and Shang Junlin walked and stopped like ordinary people, enjoying their rare leisure time. The crowd suddenly began to surge. Shun Yu was caught off guard and was squeezed a few times. Shang Junlin couldn't stand it and firmly protected her in his arms. What's going on? Shun Yu laid on the man's chest and asked in a muffled voice. It's almost time. They are all looking for a good place to watch the fireworks. Shang Junlin's voice was steady. Do we also need to find a suitable place? No, I have already asked someone to find a place. We can go there directly. The crowd dispersed a little. Shun Yu withdrew from Shang Junlin's arms. The 2 slowly moved with the crowd. Beauty, are you also going to watch the fireworks? Why don't you come with me? I promise you that I can let you see the most gorgeous fireworks. You don't need to squeeze with these boorish people. A slightly frivolous voice came from behind. Shun Yu turned around and saw a young man wearing a gorgeous robe standing not far away. He was looking at her with covetous eyes. Beauty, don't be afraid. I am not a bad person. If you are worried, you can ask the people around you to accompany you. Shun Yu looked back at Shang Junlin in disbelief. Was this person serious? Genius. 1 second. Remember this website, www.bk50. CC Literature Mobile Version Website, MBK50. CC. Chapter 30. Shang Junlin's face darkened when he heard the first sentence. When Shun Yu turned to look at him, Shang Junlin had already returned to his expressionless face. But Shun Yu could feel Shang Junlin's anger. The more he didn't show it, the more it showed how angry he was. Shun Yu was originally angry because he was offended, but after hearing Shang Junlin's last sentence, he only felt it was funny. Nowadays, there were really people who didn't care about their lives because of lust. It was rare for His Majesty to be so angry. Shun Yu approached Shang Junlin, poked his arm, and whispered, Lin, how does it feel to be robbed on the street for the first time? You doesn't seem to be angry at all. Shang Junlin also whispered back. Of course I'm angry, but I believe that Lin will seek justice for me. Thinking about it this way, I feel that a clown is not worth getting angry over. Is His Majesty angry? Obviously, Shang Junlin was angry, but the reason for his anger was different from what Shen Yu thought. He was angry because Shen Yu was coveted by someone. How dare that person covet his emperor? The person opposite them obviously didn't know who he had provoked. When he saw the two of them whispering together, he thought that they were tempted by his proposal, so he continued to say, "Look, there are so many people here. Even if you rush over, you may not be able to find a good spot. It won't be good if you get bumped into by others. If you come with me, you won't have these troubles at all. I promise that my place won't be crowded at all. Not only that, you will also have the best view. Our young master is right. Don't fail to appreciate his kindness. Our young master lowered himself to invite you. It's your fortune." Shen Yu was now very curious about the identity of the well-dressed young man. There were many influential people in the imperial capital. If he didn't have some power, how could he say such words? Does Lin know who that person is? I don't know. Shen Yu didn't know either. In his previous life, he had dealt with many influential people for the sake of King Yu, but there was no such person among them. He thought that his family had some power, but he didn't have any achievements. We still don't know who you are. Shouldn't you introduce yourself before you invite someone? I was careless. Come, tell them who I am. Our young master is the Chen family's legitimate young master, Chen Mingfu. Our young master's legitimate younger sister is going to enter the palace and become the empress in the future. The manservant's face was full of pride. What a coincidence. The Chen family was Princess Consort Li's maternal family. The legitimate daughter of the Chen family was the woman that Prince Li had tried to send into Shang Junlin's harem. Lin, what do you think is going on with the Chen family? Why are all the young masters and young mistresses rushing to? The Chen family is too ambitious, Shang Junlin interrupted him. You said, isn't that right? Shen Yu had heard of the Chen family. When the previous emperor was on the throne, the Chen family was only a small family. Later, a legitimate daughter of the Chen family married Prince Li as his first wife, and Prince Li stood on the right side during Shang Junlin's ascension to the throne. The Chen family rose along with the tide, and with Prince Li's help, they grew stronger day by day. Lin is right. Those who are not worthy of the position should give up their position, Shen Yu said. Under Prince Li's manipulation, many of the Chen family's descendants entered the bureaucracy. If they could do real work, then it was fine. If they only knew how to fill their own pockets, then it was better to give up their positions as soon as possible. Chen Mingfu didn't expect that the two of them wouldn't be surprised by his identity. His mind, which had been dazed by the beauty, finally cleared up a little. However, he wasn't willing to give up just like that. In the crowd, he saw a youth wearing a fox mask at first glance. Although he could only see half of the youth's face, the beautiful jawline under the mask, and the slender waist under the robe all made his heart ripple. He, who was used to seeing beautiful women, could tell at a glance that the youth was a rare specimen. He was definitely more delicious than any of the women he had tasted before. Fearing that the youth might have an extraordinary background, Chen Mingfu didn't dare to be too blatant. He only wanted to coax the youth with nice words first. When the youth arrived at his place, he could do whatever he wanted. He was used to doing this kind of thing, so his mouth was very persuasive. Shen Yu pretended to be persuaded. Why don't we go and take a look? Shang Junlin didn't understand what Shen Yu wanted to do, but he was sure that he could protect Shen Yu, so he didn't object. Seeing that the two of them were persuaded by him, Chen Mingfu's face was full of joy. He quickly ordered the servant to lead the way. The place Chen Mingfu was talking about was on the upper floor of a restaurant. It was a semi-open room. Shen Yu stood at the top and looked at the sky. He sighed. This location is really good. The view was wide and there were no obstructions. When the fireworks were lit, they could enjoy the beautiful scenery to their heart's content. Of course, if someone wanted to do something here, even if they wanted to call for help, no one would be able to help them. The restaurant staff served good wine and dishes. After making sure that the guests didn't have any other needs, they left. How does the place Lin chose compare to this place? If there were no troublesome people, Shen Yu felt that it was good to watch the fireworks here. If you like it here, you can watch it here. Shun Yu and Shang Junlin talked together, completely ignoring Qian Mingfu's existence. Qian Mingfu waited for a while and couldn't sit still anymore. He didn't invite them here to watch the two of them make a scene. He poured 2 full glasses of wine and walked over. It's fate that brought us together. Let me propose a toast to the two of you. Shun Yu didn't take it. Shang Junlin took it, but he didn't drink it. He directly put it on the table. What do the two of you mean by this? Qian Mingfu's face became ugly. He originally wanted to use gentle means, but it seemed that it wouldn't work. No other meaning. I'm not in good health, so I can't drink. Shun Yu didn't seem to feel Qian Mingfu's dissatisfaction. What about him? Maybe he just doesn't want to drink. After all, we don't know if there's anything in the wine that shouldn't be added. Shun Yu said lightly. You mean I'll put drugs in the wine? Qian Mingfu smiled sinisterly. I wanted to let you enjoy it a little. Since you don't know how to appreciate favors, don't blame me. Come, take them down. Shun Yu and Shang Junlin sat still. After a long time, the people Qian Mingfu called didn't show up. Aya, young Master Qian, do you want to speak louder? Maybe they didn't hear you. Shun Yu supported his chin with one hand and smiled. The two people's fearless appearance made Qian Mingfu panic. He put on a strong front and said, What do you want to do? Don't you know who I am? Shouldn't we ask you this? Qian Mingfu, your movements look very familiar. How many men and women have you fooled? Don't you know that my uncle is Prince Li? Aren't you afraid that Prince Li will find trouble with you? Prince Li, Prince Li can't even protect himself. Instead of worrying about us, why don't you worry about yourself first? Shun Yu walked out from behind the table. Every time he took a step forward, Qian Mingfu took a step back. In order to make it easier for him to act, Qian Mingfu didn't leave anyone in the room. He wanted to use the wine to drug the two people, but he didn't expect them to fall for it. It was even possible that they did it on purpose from the beginning. Thinking of this, Qian Mingfu's heart was filled with hatred. The candlelight poured down from above. Half of it shone on Shun Yu's face. Qian Mingfu looked at the half of his face that was covered, and he became bold. He reached out to take off the mask on Shun Yu's face. He wanted to see who this person really was. When he got out, he would definitely take revenge for himself. Before he could touch Shun Yu's face, a chopstick flew over. Qian Mingfu covered his pierced hand and fell to the side. Shang Junlin walked over with a cold expression and looked down at him. Who allowed you to touch him? How dare you? I won't let you go. Qian Mingfu was in so much pain that he gasped. Is that so? Shun Yu took a few steps forward and stepped on Qian Mingfu's wound. Does it hurt? When Shun Yu spoke, his voice was raised, as if he had found something fun. He put more force into his foot, and the coldness in his eyes became deeper and deeper. Qian Mingfu was in so much pain that he curled up and couldn't speak. It's good that it hurts. Have you ever thought that the person you bullied is in 100 times, no, 1,000 times more pain than you? Who bullied my son? The door was suddenly pushed open. A middle-aged man in a blue official's uniform appeared at the door with a group of people dressed as soldiers. When he saw the scene in the room, the man took a deep breath. How dare you? Go, take them down. I want to see who dares to touch the people of the Qian family. Without waiting for his people to take action, another group of well-trained men in black surrounded everyone. Shang Junlin slowly adjusted Shun Yu's loose mask and turned around. Qian Daren, you are so powerful. As he spoke, he slowly took off the mask on his face. Your Majesty. Qian Daren's legs went soft, and he directly knelt down. I didn't know. I didn't know it was Your Majesty. Please forgive me, Your Majesty. Towards the end, there was an unconcealable tremor in his voice. When Qian Mingfu heard Qian Mingfu's words, he rolled his eyes and fainted. He didn't know if it was because of the pain or because he was scared. Qian Daren knelt on the ground and lowered his posture. I really didn't know that my son offended Your Majesty. I will definitely discipline my son strictly. I beg Your Majesty to forgive me. No matter how much he loved his son, Qian Daren's heart was filled with resentment. He could have provoked anyone, but he had to provoke Her Majesty. Did he think that the family was developing too well? He could ignore the life and death of a son, but he couldn't ignore the life and death of the Chen family. Now, he just prayed that Chen Mingfu didn't have time to cause trouble. He gritted his teeth and continued, "Your Majesty can punish my son however you want. I only ask that Your Majesty doesn't implicate the innocent." Chen Daren's words are interesting. How does Your Majesty not implicate the innocent? Does Your Majesty turn a blind eye to your actions of using your power to oppress others? Shun Yu sarcastically raised the corner of his mouth. If it wasn't Her Majesty and him who appeared here today, wouldn't they have accepted their fate? Would they have been defiled by scum? Chen Daren doesn't need to say more. Your Majesty is impartial. Your son and the Chen family, who is innocent and who is not, will definitely be investigated. Chen Daren collapsed on the ground. Prince Li couldn't even take care of himself. This time, no one would come to save them. Time's up. Shang Junlin's calm voice sounded. What? Shun Yu was at a loss. Come with me. Shang Junlin held Shun Yu's hand and walked to a place with an open field of vision. Almost as soon as they stood still, there was the sound of an explosion outside. Countless huge fireworks bloomed in the dark night sky, dyeing the night sky as bright as day. All kinds of lights scattered down, making it seem like a paradise on earth. The noise of people faded away, and only the huge flowers blooming in the dark sky remained between heaven and earth. Happy New Year! Shang Junlin's slightly magnetic voice clearly sounded in the loud explosion. Shun Yu narrowed his eyes and said, Lin, Happy New Year. Genius 1 second. Remember this website, www.bk50. CC Literature Mobile Version Reading Website, mbk50. cc. Chapter 31. The fireworks lasted for half an hour. 21 GGD. Shun Yu and Shang Junlin ignored the trembling Chen Daren and enjoyed the annual event. The people downstairs were noisy, but the upstairs was quiet. Except for Shun Yu and Shang Junlin, no one dared to make a sound. Chen Daren wanted to plead for mercy for the Chen family, but he didn't dare to disturb the emperor and the emperor's leisure time. He only hoped that the emperor would be in a better mood and punish Chen Mingfu lightly. Chen Mingfu woke up with a loud roar. At this time, he didn't dare to be arrogant and knelt there like a quail. After the display of fireworks, the imperial army arrived as well. The Chen family was taken away, and they had to find out what they had done in the past few years. It was already very late. Shun Yu didn't have the mood to walk around anymore, so he went back to the palace with Shang Junlin. After taking a hot bath, Shun Yu came out with his half-dry hair. Shang Junlin was reading the memorials. Shun Yu went over, It's so late, Your Majesty is still busy with official business. After spending so much time with Shang Junlin, Shun Yu found that he was really a diligent emperor. Every day, he spent a lot of time dealing with the memorials handed to him by his subordinates. Especially with so many things happening recently, he almost didn't have much free time. Shang Junlin frowned and put down the memorials. Why didn't you dry your hair? After saying that, he took a dry handkerchief and dried Shun Yu's hair. You should take care of your body. Shun Yu squinted and sat in front of Shang Junlin, letting him dry his hair gently. His black hair was smooth, and it occasionally slipped through his fingers, giving him a cool touch. The young man had just taken a bath, so there was a faint fragrance on his body. They were close, and Shang Junlin could even feel the young man's body temperature. Shun Yu's fingers rubbed against his scalp, giving him a slight numbness. He moved his neck. He never knew that being pressed on his scalp would feel this way. The numbness snaked down from his scalp and reached his heart. Shun Yu sat in front of Shang Junlin. Because of his movements, he was almost in Shang Junlin's arms. Shang Junlin's biting cold aura pounced on him with each of his movements, firmly encircling him. What's wrong? Shang Junlin stopped what he was doing. Did I hurt you? No, Your Majesty, your strength is just right. Shun Yu put away the strange feeling in his heart. Shang Junlin continued what he was doing just now. He wiped Shun Yu's hair hastily, but because there was too much hair, Shang Junlin dried some parts of Shun Yu's hair. Shun Yu stared at the candlelight in front of him. He felt that he needed to find something to talk about. Otherwise, he would feel uneasy. Sweeping his gaze across the table, he saw the booklet spread open on the table. After reading the contents of the booklet, he asked, "Is this from Lin County?" "Yes, the gift that Gui Jun gave me last time has been given to a specialist to study. Lin County has a great flood every year, so it should be useful." The two chatted about this topic for a while. Shong Junlin put away the handkerchief. "It's done." Shun Yu touched his hair that was no longer wet. He smiled and said, "Your Majesty's handiwork is really good." Shong Junlin, "In this world, Gui Jun is probably the only one who dares to ask me to help dry your hair." Shun Yu, "Who asked your Majesty to be my husband? If your Majesty wants, I can also dry your Majesty's hair for you. Then Gui Jun can help me next time. Don't forget what you said today." After the excitement of New Year's Eve, the ministers gradually received news about the Chen family. The Chen family relied on Prince Li's support to act arrogantly and made countless enemies in the imperial court. When they heard that the Chen family had provoked someone they shouldn't have, many families were secretly happy. After the new year, there were 15 days of rest. During this time, everyone could visit relatives and friends. There was no need to attend morning court. If there was something important, His Majesty would summon the person in charge to the palace. Do you think His Majesty will severely punish the Chen family this time? I'm not sure. After His Majesty put them in jail, he didn't summon anyone from the Ministry of Justice or the Supreme Court. I don't know if he just wants to give them a warning. I don't think so. Don't you remember what happened to Prince Li? Prince Li is still grounded. It's obvious that the incident really angered His Majesty. This time, the Chen family might be investigated because of Prince Li. The father and son of the Chen family were suddenly taken away on New Year's Eve. There was no warning before, and His Majesty didn't give a reason after the incident. In fact, this was the His Majesty that the ministers were familiar with. Announcing complete details like the previous two cases was not the Emperor's style at all. The news of the Chen family quickly spread to the Prince Li manor. When Princess Consort Li heard about her family, she couldn't help but complain to Prince Li, "Your Highness, don't you know what kind of person my father is? He definitely won't do anything serious. Also, my nephew has always been obedient and filial to us. Why did His Majesty put him in jail without a word?" Prince Li also heard the rumors outside. However, there were all kinds of rumors, but there was no real reason. He comforted Princess Consort Li, "Don't worry, my dear. I've already sent someone to find out." Princess Consort Li had deep feelings for her family. Otherwise, she wouldn't have been helping them all this time. Prince Li also had a good impression of the Chen family. "I believe you, Your Highness." Although he was grounded, it wasn't difficult for Prince Li to find out some information. He had developed in the capital for many years and had his own connections. He immediately ordered someone to investigate. Prince Li's actions didn't escape the eyes of the man on the throne. Shong Junlin listened to the Hidden Dragon Guard's report and sneered. "Let him investigate if he wants to. I want to see how he plans to save the Chen family." The Chen family's matter was neither big nor small. It all depended on Shong Junlin's attitude. If he didn't want to investigate further, he could just punish them and release them. However, if he wanted to investigate further, it wouldn't be easy to get away. During the meal, Shong Junlin told Shun Yu about this matter. How does His Majesty plan to deal with the Chen family? Shun Yu was also curious. Shong Junlin didn't answer this question. Instead, he said, "There will be students coming to the capital for the imperial examinations at the beginning of spring. It's time for the officials to be transferred back." Shun Yu understood that Shong Junlin didn't plan to let them go easily. Shong Junlin had been fighting outside in his early years and didn't have much control over the imperial court. If he hadn't used bloody methods to threaten those with ulterior motives, who knew what the imperial court would be like now? Using new people was the fastest way. Coincidentally, the new people who passed the imperial examinations a few years ago had already completed their training. As long as there was a position in the capital, they could be transferred back to take up the position immediately. So there's going to be an imperial examination this year. Xunyu sighed. There were two systems for selecting officials in Dahuan. One was the imperial examination system that was suitable for most people, and the other was for the convenience of the nobles. As the only legitimate son of Zhenbei Hu, Xunyu was supposed to be the heir of the Hu Fu. In the future, he could inherit the title of nobility and directly enter the imperial court as an official. Unfortunately, he met a biased father. "Does His Majesty want to try?" Shang Junlin suddenly asked. "What?" Xunyu reacted and said in surprise, "His Majesty is asking me if I want to participate in this year's imperial examination with the students. If His Majesty wants to, I can arrange it." Shang Junlin said lightly. "Your Majesty." Xunyu supported his chin with one hand and asked jokingly, "If I really pass, will I go to the imperial court as an official or continue to be Your Majesty's His Majesty's Majesty? With Your Majesty's talent, you can, Your Majesty." Xunyu interrupted Shang Junlin, "It is my fortune to be with Your Majesty. I won't regret any of my decisions. Your Majesty also shouldn't try to trick me into doing two jobs. Dahuan is full of talents and doesn't lack me." Xunyu really felt that his current identity was quite good. He was above everyone and only under one person. There were no restrictions. Shang Junlin could see that Xunyu wasn't lying and didn't continue the topic. After the meal, Eunuch Meng came to report. "Your Majesty, His Highness Prince Li requests an audience." "Prince Li? Wasn't he grounded by Your Majesty?" Xunyu remembered that after the previous incident, Prince Li was ordered to reflect on his mistakes behind closed doors. "He should be here for the Qian family." Shang Junlin explained, "He and Princess Consort Li have a deep relationship. If Princess Consort Li asks him for help, he will try to find a way to see me. I didn't think that Prince Li, who is passionate about matchmaking his niece with Your Majesty, would be such an affectionate person." Xunyu shook his head. He and Princess Consort Li met in the past. When the previous emperor was on the throne, they were always suppressed. It was only after I ascended the throne that their lives became better. Shang Junlin turned to Eunuch Meng and said, "Bring him here." Not long after, Prince Li followed behind Eunuch Meng. "Your subject greets Your Majesty, Your Majesty." Xunyu looked at the man who seemed to have lost half of his energy. Prince Li looked much older than the last time they met, and his attitude towards him was much more respectful. "What is Prince Li doing here in the palace instead of reflecting on your mistakes?" Prince Li didn't beat around the bush and said bluntly, "Your Majesty, your subject is here for the Qian family." "Does Prince Li know what crime the Qian family committed?" Xunyu asked. Prince Li's back bowed deeply. "Your subject only asks that Your Majesty spare the Qian family for my sake. Your subject is willing to hand over all the rights that belong to Prince Li." This determination was not small. Handing over everything was equivalent to Prince Li voluntarily removing his royal status. Xunyu was silent. It seemed that Prince Li really valued Princess Consort Li very much. Shang Junlin's knuckles tapped on the table, as if he was thinking about something. His expression couldn't be seen clearly. After a long time, Shang Junlin said, "The country has its laws. I can only say that if their crimes are not worthy of the death penalty, I will spare their lives." "Thank you, Your Majesty." Prince Li bowed deeply. After the new year, Imperial Physician Jiyu came to take Xunyu's pulse. After Imperial Physician Gu's care, the poison in Xunyu's body had long been cleared, and his physical condition was much better than before. "Your Highness is recovering well. We can change the prescription now." Imperial Physician Jiyu wrote a new prescription based on Xunyu's body. Before he left a wooden box for Xunyu. "Your subject has combined the medicinal power to create a new ointment. Your Highness can try it out." The wooden box contained 5 medicine bottles made of white jade. Each bottle was about the length of a finger and slightly thicker than a finger. Xunyu picked up one and slowly opened the lid. A very light fragrance wafted out. The bottle contained a transparent ointment. "What are you looking at?" Shang Junlin walked over. Xunyu handed him a bottle. Imperial Physician Jiyu sent a new ointment. He said that he added some medicine and asked me to try it. Xunyu would often make some medicine to promote blood circulation and remove blood stasis. The Imperial Physician Hospital would send some over every once in a while. Usually, it was handed over to Mushi to handle. He didn't think much of it since it was sent by Imperial Physician Gu. He opened the lid of the bottle in Shang Junlin's hand. "Your Highness, smell it. This ointment is quite fragrant." Shang Junlin looked at the transparent ointment in the bottle and fell silent. Genius 1 second. Remember this website, www.bk50. CC Literature Mobile Version Website, mbk50. cc. Chapter 32. What's wrong? Sensing Shang Junlin's strange mood, Shinyu was at a loss. Does Gui Jun know what this medicine is used for? Shang Junlin asked after a moment of silence. Isn't it used to promote blood circulation and remove blood stasis? Shinyu was even more at a loss. Not only this, there are many similar medicines there, all sent by the Imperial Hospital. Shinyu pointed to a small compartment near the head of the bed. Shang Junlin usually didn't go to that compartment to get medicine, so he didn't know what medicine was in that compartment. Shang Junlin took a deep breath. It was indeed a good medicine for promoting blood circulation and removing blood stasis, but it was used in different places. He put down the medicine bottle in his hand. "Jun will take a look." Shinyu followed behind Shang Junlin and walked to the bedside. He watched as Shang Junlin opened the small compartment's wooden door and took out a pile of bottles and jars from inside. Some of the bottles were slender, some were round, and some were square. Shang Junlin casually picked up a few small boxes and opened them one by one. Out of the 10 small boxes, only 2 were filled with normal ointment, the rest were used to moisturize. "Do you usually use these medicines?" Shinyu thought for a moment and shook his head. "I don't think so." He rarely got injured after entering the palace, and the few times he did, it was unintentionally caused by Shang Junlin. If it wasn't for Shang Junlin's insistence, he wouldn't have applied medicine on a small injury that couldn't be considered a serious injury. "Your Majesty, is there a problem with this medicine?" Shinyu didn't understand why Shang Junlin's reaction was so abnormal. "There's no problem, but it's best if Gui Jun doesn't use it." Shang Junlin pointed to the few that Imperial Physician Gu had sent, especially these. "But Imperial Physician Gu said these are good for my health." Shinyu was even more curious. He was sure that Imperial Physician Gu wouldn't lie to him about this matter. Does Gui Jun believe Jun or Imperial Physician Gu? Shang Junlin frowned slightly, a trace of dissatisfaction in his tone. "Of course I believe in your Majesty," Shinyu said without hesitation. Shang Junlin's mood warmed up. "Ask Mushi to put the medicine away and put it somewhere else." "Your Majesty, are you really not going to tell me what these medicines are used for?" Shinyu approached the man and poked his arm. "Are you really that curious?" Shang Junlin looked at him deeply. Shinyu nodded. "It's used by men when they're having fun." Shang Junlin's tone was calm, but the tip of his ears was slightly red. Shinyu paused. The medicine bottle in his hand seemed to have become a hot potato. He didn't know whether to put it down or take it away. Thinking of what he had done just now, he wished he could find something to cover himself up. I really don't know. Why didn't Imperial Physician Gu remind me when he gave me the medicine?" Shinyu hurriedly put the medicine bottle in his hand on the table. "I'll ask Mushi to take care of it." Unexpectedly, Shinyu saw the redness on Shang Junlin's ears. He even forgot about the embarrassment just now. It was really rare that His Majesty would feel embarrassed. The hand that was putting the medicine bottle turned a corner and forcibly moved closer to Shang Junlin's face. The young man's slightly joking voice sounded. "Imperial Physician Gu specially prescribed the medicine for me. It seems like it would be a waste of his good intentions to throw it away." "Your Majesty, don't you think so?" Shinyu leaned forward and the distance between him and Shang Junlin was getting closer and closer. Their breaths mingled and a sense of ambiguity suddenly arose. "I like the smell of this medicine. Does your Majesty like it?" Shang Junlin couldn't help but recall the fragrance that he had smelled just now. If that fragrance and Shinyu were to become one, Shinyu moved closer and stared at Shang Junlin's ears. As he expected, after a few words, Shang Junlin's ears became redder. Shang Junlin's eyes became deeper and deeper. Finally, when Shen Yu was very close to him, he reached out his hand, pinched Shen Yu's chin, and gently rubbed it. You seem to be very interested. If you want, I can accompany you to try it tonight. How about it? The man's breath approached with a strong sense of aggression. The biting cold air swept towards Shen Yu as if it was tangible and firmly surrounded him. No need, no need. Shen Yu admitted defeat. I was wrong. Oh. What did you do wrong? Shang Junlin didn't stop moving. Shen Yu turned his head uncomfortably. He felt a soft and hot touch on his cheek and his heartbeat suddenly accelerated. Your Majesty, Shen Yu was really regretful. If he had known that Shang Junlin was so easy to tease, he wouldn't have teased him to see Shang Junlin blush. I think the smell of this ointment is very suitable for you. I like it very much. The man's deep voice sounded close to his ear and his hot breath sprayed on his neck. This time, not only his ear, but also Shen Yu's entire face turned red. Shang Junlin's eyes darkened and the tip of his nose touched the warm skin of Shen Yu's neck. Shen Yu was stimulated and quivered. It was the first time he was touched by someone like this. It was as if there were little flames burning along with the man's movements. It was a temptation. Like a moth to a flame, even if he knew that he would be burned to ashes by the burning fire, he still couldn't help but want to get closer. Pleased by Shen Yu's reaction, Shang Junlin no longer bullied the fragile skin of the young man's neck and gradually pulled away from him. I like this ointment very much. You have to keep it well. Maybe it will come in handy soon. Shen Yu still felt the skin on the side of his neck was burning hot. He couldn't help but reach out and touch it. Your Majesty, Fang Daren asks for an audience. Eunuch Meng's voice broke the different atmosphere in the room. Shang Junlin approached, touched Shen Yu's face, bent down and whispered in his ear, Gui Jun, I'm looking forward to it. After saying that, Shang Junlin pulled away from him and looked at Shen Yu with a smile in his eyes for a while before leaving. Not long after, Eunuch Meng came in and began to clean up the messy bottles and jars on the table. Eunuch Meng, what are you doing? Shen Yu looked at the pile of bottles and jars and thought of the scene just now. He just didn't want to see it. Your Majesty specially ordered me to put these away. Eunuch Meng explained with a smile. Shen Yu slightly widened his eyes. Shang Junlin can't be serious, right? The Imperial Institute of Medicine. Imperial Dr. Ji Yu was sorting out the medicinal herbs when suddenly several palace servants came in with rewards. The leader was Eunuch Meng's adopted son, Eunuch Meng Jr., who also served the emperor. Although his status was not as high as Eunuch Meng's, it was much higher than other palace servants. Under the curious gazes of the people in the Imperial Academy of Medicine, young Eunuch Meng walked straight to Imperial Physician Ji Yu and said with a smile, His Majesty likes the medicine presented by Imperial Physician Ji Yu very much. He specially ordered me to come and give you a reward. Eunuch Meng Jr. waved his hand and the palace servants behind him came forward with the rewards. In addition to the usual rewards, there were some rare medicinal herbs. Eunuch Meng Jr. explained to Imperial Dr. Ji Yu, Your Majesty said that Imperial Dr. Ji Yu is a benevolent doctor. These medicinal herbs will be of great use in Imperial Dr. Gu's hands. Under the envious gaze of everyone, Imperial Dr. Ji Yu accepted the rewards. He was not very interested in other rewards. Only the rare medicinal herbs could be said to be sent to the bottom of his heart. After Eunuch Meng Jr. left with the palace servants, Imperial Dr. Ji Yu also entered the room. The others dispersed one after another. Imperial Dr. Ji Yu is really lucky. That's right. Shen Gui Jun is so favored now. As long as he is here, Imperial Dr. Gu's life will only get better and better. Didn't that person used to be so arrogant? Does he look down on Imperial Physician Ji Yu? His eyes are almost in the sky. I haven't seen him find trouble with Imperial Physician Ji Yu recently. How dare he? Now he is probably on tenterhooks every day, afraid that Imperial Dr. Ji Yu will take revenge. Compared to him, I still prefer Imperial Dr. Ji Yu. Imperial Dr. Ji Yu has never been arrogant. If you encounter something you don't understand in medicine, you can ask him for help. Imperial Dr. Ji Yu will teach you carefully, unlike Imperial Dr. Sunday. If you ask him, He is afraid that you will learn too much. I can't agree more. Last time I asked Imperial Dr. Sun for help, not only did he not give me a good face, but he also ordered me to do a lot of stupid things. In the end, it was Imperial Dr. Gu who solved my doubts. Under the eaves in the corner, Imperial Dr. Sun's face became more and more ugly. Wasn't it just a man who judged people by their looks? Don't think that you can rest easy. Before he was discovered, Imperial Dr. Sun quickly left. Imperial Dr. Gu came back with a pile of rewards. He picked out some that Gu Huai could use and gave them to him. Brother, why did you suddenly receive so many rewards? Gu Huai played with the emerald in his hand and asked casually. His people found out that there was another group of people investigating Fei Meng recently. Although he didn't know who the other party was, what their purpose was, and why Fei Meng only attracted that person's attention after so many years, he couldn't tolerate one thing. Someone was trying to involve Imperial Dr. Gu in this matter. His Majesty likes the medicine I sent into the palace. Imperial Dr. Gu separated the medicinal herbs that were rewarded. Some of them still had vitality and could be planted. Medicine? What medicine? It is for His Majesty. Children shouldn't know too much. Imperial Dr. Gu was helpless. He couldn't tell Gu Huai what the medicine was used for. Speaking of rewards, I can roughly guess what His Majesty is thinking. It can be considered as another way of declaring sovereignty. It wasn't that Imperial Dr. Gu didn't notice His Majesty's occasional hostility towards him, but he didn't expect His Majesty to use such a method to tell him that His Majesty would only be His Majesty's. Brother, what kind of person do you think His Majesty is? He is a good emperor and a good lover. He was a good emperor and Shen Guojuan's good lover. If it was in the past, Imperial Dr. Gu wouldn't have dared to believe that His Majesty had such a soft side. Gu Huai lowered his eyes. From the information he found, Shang Junlin was indeed a good emperor. Saying that he was a tyrant was just someone deliberately distorting the facts. Moreover, Shang Junlin had been in the army for a long time in his early years and had deep feelings for the army. He was definitely not the kind of person who would harm hundreds of thousands of soldiers for his own selfish desires. He had to find a way to meet Shang Junlin. Shen Guijun might be a good breakthrough point. Shen Yu didn't know that someone wanted to find His Majesty through him. As the sky darkened, he became more and more restless. It was because of what Shang Junlin said during the day. Shen Yu thought about it for a day and still couldn't determine whether Shang Junlin was serious or joking. Is His Majesty waiting for me? Shang Junlin walked in with a cold aura. Your Majesty. Shen Yu put down the book in his hand and stood up. Shang Junlin dispelled the cold aura and walked to Shen Yu's side. What is His Majesty looking at? His Majesty asked someone to bring a storybook from outside the palace. Shen Yu was thinking about something else and didn't read it at all. Why did His Majesty ask Eunuch Meng to put away the ointment? If His Majesty didn't mention it, I would have forgotten. Why, His Majesty wants to try. Shang Junlin made a gesture to call Eunuch Meng in. Don't. Shen Yu stopped him with a sincere look. I don't want to. His Majesty, don't misunderstand me. I remember that His Majesty once told the King of Yu that I was better than him in every way. Shang Junlin hugged Shen Yu's waist and pressed himself against him. His Majesty, why don't you experience it for yourself? Chapter 33. Their bodies were so close together that they were hot and strong. Even though they were separated by a few layers of clothes, she could still feel the strong force. It was not the first time that Shen Yu had intimate contact with Shang Junlin, but it had never been as torturous and difficult to endure as this time. The man's aggressive aura was extremely strong, and he was so close to her that Shen Yu had no doubt that the man would really eat her up. How can your Majesty compare yourself with others? How many people in this world can compare to your Majesty? Not to mention the insignificant Prince of Yu. Oh, Shang Junlin laughed from his chest. I didn't know that I was so important in your Majesty's heart. Of course your Majesty is the most important person in my heart. Shen Yu opened her mouth and said, Let me have a taste. Is your Majesty's mouth smeared with honey? How can your words be so sweet? Shang Junlin lowered his head, but Shen Yu hurriedly reached out to block him. How can your majesty wrongly accuse me? Obviously, what I said was from the bottom of my heart. Shang Junlin did not force him and moved back a little. How many people did your majesty train from to be so familiar with it? Shen Yu was not to be outdone. Then I also want to ask your majesty, how did you know what the ointment is used for? Your majesty is really... Shang Junlin laughed. Before your majesty entered the palace, didn't a mema teach you these things? After learning that Shang Junlin was going to marry the son of Zhenbei who, a mema in the palace sent Shang Junlin a book on how to do it. Together with the book, there was also some precious ointment from the imperial family. After Shen Yu entered the palace, the Imperial Institute of Medicine sent some ointment one after another. When Imperial Physician Ji Yu reported Shen Yu's condition, he repeatedly warned that it should not be too intense. Shen Yu's current body would not be able to bear it. Shang Junlin did not have any other intentions when he asked Shen Yu to enter the palace. He was just annoyed by the minister's quarrel, so he casually agreed. If it wasn't Shen Yu who entered the palace but anyone else, they would only end up being left to fend for themselves in a palace. The people sent by Count North talk too much nonsense. I'm too lazy to listen to them, so I drove them all out. The people sent by His Majesty only do things and don't talk. Shen Yu argued one by one. He really couldn't be blamed for this. At that time, he had just been reborn. Just digesting the fact that he had been reborn took him a few days, not to mention asking about the various things that had happened at that time. After all, there are many things that can happen in 10 years. There was a huge information gap between Shen Yu who was 10 years old and Shen Yu who was less than 20 years old. Not only that, but he also had to deal with Shen Qingran and his mother. With all kinds of things piled up together, Shen Yu directly ignored some of the less important things. In his previous life, Shen Yu's body was much worse than it was now. He didn't have any particularly intimate contact with Prince Yu. Because of his body, he wasn't enthusiastic about this kind of thing at all. It was a freak combination of factors that caused the ointment incident. Shang Junlin understood. So, your majesty didn't deliberately want to see me make a fool of myself? Shen Yu was really wronged this time. He really didn't know. At most, he didn't stop when he knew. He just wanted to see His Majesty blush. How could I have the guts to see His Majesty make a fool of himself? Shen Yu was dissatisfied. Others may not dare, but I don't think your majesty doesn't dare. Shang Junlin didn't comment. Shen Yu thought that it was true. Even if he knew in advance, he might have done the same thing. Your majesty, it's not good. Prince Huaiyu committed suicide in prison. After Eunuch Meng received the news from the servant, he didn't dare to delay. He directly opened the door and walked in with his head lowered. He didn't know what his two masters were doing and didn't dare to raise his head. He only complained in his heart. Why did something happen to Prince Huaiyu at this time? What did you say? Shang Junlin let go of Shen Yu and asked sternly. Just now, someone from the prison sent a message saying that Prince Huaiyu committed suicide in prison. I didn't dare to delay. How is Prince Huaiyu now? Shen Yu went straight to the point. He has been temporarily saved. Eunuch Meng replied. Directly summon the imperial physician. The person who sent the message to see me and send someone to investigate. I want to know what happened tonight. Shang Junlin's voice was as cold as ice, threatening to kill. The hidden dragon guards quickly took action. The news wasn't hard to find. Not long after, the hidden dragon guards passed the information to Shang Junlin. Shen Yu, your majesty, how is Prince Huaiyu now? Shang Junlin, he didn't hurt any vital parts. The imperial physician has already gone to take a look. I need to go there. Shen Yu, can I go with you? Shen Yu was still concerned about what happened in this life but didn't happen in his previous life. In the secret prison. Prince Huaiyu's identity was special. He wasn't imprisoned in the Ministry of Justice's prison, but in the secret prison. Shen Yu stepped into this place for the second time. He felt that the security was much tighter than the last time. Shang Junlin must have increased the security of the secret prison after the jailbreak. Along the way, the surroundings were very quiet. There weren't many people imprisoned here. Everyone was kept far apart from each other. Under the guidance of the jailer, They walked for about 15 minutes and arrived at the cell where Prince Huayu was imprisoned. The imperial physician was already treating him. Shunyu looked around, but imperial physician Jiyu wasn't inside. Suddenly, Shunyu frowned. He felt a very subtle gaze of disgust. Shunyu looked around one by one. His gaze lingered on someone for 2 seconds. Interesting. Why did a person he had never seen have such great hostility towards him? Imperial physician Sun deliberately took Imperial physician Gu's place. He didn't believe that his contribution in curing Prince Huayu would be less than Imperial physician Jiyu, who was only responsible for nursing the emperor's body. Prince Huayu slowly woke up. Seeing a circle of people standing around him, including his nephew, the emperor, standing not far from him, he understood that his suicide attempt didn't succeed. "How is Prince Huayu's condition?" Shang Junlin asked coldly. "Your Majesty, Prince Huayu is fine now." The one who spoke was an older imperial physician. "Fortunately, Prince Huayu didn't have enough strength. If he had more strength, I wouldn't have been able to save him." Shunyu couldn't help but look at the imperial physician a few more times. Was he saying this on purpose? Prince Huayu was about to faint from anger again. "You can leave first. I have a few words with Prince Huayu." "Yes." The imperial physician and the jailers retreated one after another. In the blink of an eye, there were only 3 people left. Prince Huayu supported himself against the wall and sat up, trying to look less embarrassed. "Your Majesty really dotes on this child of the Duke of Zhenbei's family. You still keep him by your side at this time. Your Majesty loves me. Naturally, you can't bear to part with me. What if I'm bullied in a place where your Majesty can't see?" Shunyu pretended to be spoiled and arrogant. Prince Huayu was stunned for a moment, then suddenly laughed. "Shen Gui-jun is right. If you love someone, you should watch over them like a pearl or a treasure. Otherwise, if you're not careful, they may be gone." Cough, cough, cough. Towards the end, Prince Huayu clutched his chest and coughed violently. After a long while, the coughing gradually stopped. "Are you okay?" Shunyu asked. Shunyu frowned and asked. He knew how uncomfortable it was to cough. At its worst, a cough could take away half of his life. I'm fine. Prince Huayu waved his hand. "I'm already used to it. With this sick body, I can't die even if I want to. If you have any questions, just ask." Shunyu and Shang Junlin looked at each other. They didn't understand why this person's attitude suddenly changed. "Let your lord ask. I won't answer whatever you ask." Prince Huayu seemed to have thought of something and added. Shunyu was even more confused. He was sure that he didn't have any interaction with Prince Huayu in his 2 lives. Why would Prince Huayu treat him differently? Why does Prince Huayu want me to ask? Isn't it the same if your Majesty asks? Shunyu directly asked the curiosity in his heart. After he finished speaking, he glanced at Shang Junlin. He didn't see any unhappy expression on the man's face. "Please ask." Feeling Shunyu's gaze, Shang Junlin said. "Fine, if he asks, so be it. I want to know why Prince Huayu sent the former emperor's concubine to your Majesty's side, and whether there is someone behind this matter." "Why?" "Of course, it's to let the former emperor know that the woman he left behind has been slept with by his own son. Ha ha ha. Presumably, when I bring this news to him, his expression will be very good. Just because of this." Shunyu thought of various reasons, but he didn't expect the truth to be so simple. "He caused me to lose my beloved. I also want him to have a taste of the feeling of his beloved being with another man behind his back." Prince Huayu chuckled and looked at Shang Junlin with a crazed expression. "He should thank you, the only one he didn't recognize as his own son. If you didn't kill those bastards, the great Huan dynasty wouldn't be surnamed Shang." Shunyu never thought that such a simple question could involve such a secret. He couldn't help but look at Shang Junlin. The man's expression was cold, as if he wasn't surprised by Prince Huayu's words. Shunyu frowned slightly. Did Shang Junlin already know something? He leaned to the side, hooked Shang Junlin's sleeve, and continued to ask, "What's the answer to the second question?" "Prince Huayu, I don't know. I did all this just to take revenge on the former emperor, but I'll give you a piece of advice." Shen Gui-jun, don't take the men of the imperial family too seriously. They are not good people. Shen Yu, does that also include Prince Huayu yourself? Prince Huayu was stunned for a moment, then said, yes, if it wasn't for me, that person should still be alive. The child of Count North's family, for your own sake, don't give out your true heart. But His Majesty is His Majesty, and you are you. His Majesty won't become what you said. Shen Yu seriously refuted. Shang Junlin's expression changed slightly, and he grabbed Shen Yu's hand, holding it firmly in his palm. Shen Yu scratched the man's palm, and Shang Junlin's frozen momentum instantly loosened. He turned around with Shen Yu. Everyone has to pay the price for the choices they make. Prince Huayu, you're on your own. It was already late at night when the two returned to Yuzhong Palace. Shen Yu usually went to bed early at this time, but when he stepped into the palace, he felt sleepy. He felt the bed and wanted to climb up, but he met a meat wall halfway. Shen Yu clung to the man's shoulder, and asked vaguely with half-closed eyes, Your Majesty? Gui-jun hasn't washed up yet. It seems so. Shen Yu thought with a confused mind, the dark prison is quite dirty, and I should wash up, but I'm so sleepy, I don't want to move, Your Majesty. The last two words were especially long. The continuous warm breath sprayed on his neck, and Shang Junlin's eyes darkened. He supported the person in his arms, and gently coaxed, I'll take you to wash up. Chapter 34. Shen Yu thought about it. A place like the dark prison was indeed not clean. If he didn't clean himself up, he wouldn't be able to sleep well. You still need to change clothes. Shen Yu suggested. After you're done, help Gui-jun change into clean clothes. After talking to Shen Yu, Shang Junlin turned his head and ordered, Mushi, go and find a set of comfortable clean clothes and a thick cloak. Yes. Eunuch Meng had received the order in advance and had already gone to prepare a bath. When Shang Junlin finished dressing Shen Yu, Eunuch Meng had just returned. Your Majesty, it's done. Shang Junlin hugged Shen Yu, who was half asleep. Is the floor heating done? Gui-jun can't stand the cold. Has the temperature in the room risen? Your Majesty, don't worry. I promise you won't feel cold. Your Majesty, aren't you bathing in the bedroom? Shen Yu listened to Shang Junlin's instructions. It didn't seem like they were going to do it in the bedroom. Take Gui-jun to another place. I'll carry Gui-jun there. If Gui-jun is sleepy, you can take a nap. Shang Junlin comforted him in a low voice. The hot water was prepared in advance. There was a special bath in the palace not far from Yuzhong Palace. The steps were made of white jade, and the hot air was dense. It was exceptionally gorgeous. Shen Yu was held in the man's arms, and only 30% of his attention was left to observe the outside. Your Majesty, where is this? Shen Yu looked at the completely unfamiliar scenery and asked in a low voice. It's a place to bathe. Shang Junlin was very patient tonight and answered all questions. Your Majesty, you lied to me. I don't usually bathe here. Shen Yu complained. Shang Junlin hugged the person in his arms to prevent her from being disturbed by the cold wind. I didn't lie to you. The dark prison is cold. I'll take you to soak in hot water. Really? Shen Yu didn't believe it. Why are you so vigilant at this time? Gui-jun, tell me, why did I lie to you? Shang Junlin raised his eyebrows. At this time, Shen Yu was very silly and easy to tease. Shen Yu tried to think with his hazy brain, but he couldn't come up with an answer. I don't know, we're almost there. Don't fall asleep yet. At this moment, all the negative emotions left Shang Junlin. In his eyes and heart, there was only the person in his arms. The distance from the bedroom to the bathing pool wasn't too far. After walking for about 15 minutes, they arrived. Eunuch Meng walked to the front and opened the door. Steam seeped out from the crack of the door. Your Majesty, do you need someone to serve you? No need. Shang Junlin carried Shen Yu and stepped through the door. He was greeted by the warm air. The huge bathtub was built indoors. Knowing that Shang Junlin was going to use it, Eunuch Meng had the palace servants prepare the floor heating in advance. At this moment, when Shang Junlin came in with Shen Yu, they didn't feel cold at all. Suddenly in a warm place, Shen Yu struggled to reach out a hand from the tightly wrapped cloak. Your Majesty, where is this? It's so warm. We've arrived at the bathing pool. Gui Jun, take a look. Shang Junlin carried Shen Yu to a chair covered with fluffy fox fur. After a short while, Shen Yu felt hot and slowly opened his eyes. What entered his sight was a piece of white gauze. There was only him and Shang Junlin in the entire hall. Not far in front of them, there was a bathtub that covered a very large area. The bathtub was filled with hot water, and steam continuously rose from the pool. Shen Yu felt that this bathtub was enough for him to swim in a few times. Warm places always made people sleepy. However, Shen Yu was very interested in this bathtub, which looked very comfortable. He struggled to get rid of the sleepiness and sat up straight. Looking around, the hall was empty. It turned out that there was no one here. It wasn't an illusion caused by the palace servant's low sense of presence. There really wasn't a single palace servant. Even eunuch Meng and Mu Shi weren't here. Shen Yu pulled Shang Junlin's sleeves and asked under the man's puzzled gaze, Your Majesty, are there only the two of us? Who else does Your Majesty want to come? Shang Junlin narrowed his eyes. Where are the palace servants? Are there no servants? Shen Yu didn't feel any danger. We don't need them. Shang Junlin replied faintly. Oh. Shen Yu withdrew his hand and slowly undid his cloak. Shang Junlin half-squatted and pressed Shen Yu's hand. Shen Yu looked at him in confusion. Your Majesty, I'll do it. Regardless of Shen Yu's shock, Shang Junlin half-squatted and pushed Shen Yu's hand aside. He skillfully began to undo Shen Yu's cloak. He put on the cloak with his own hands and took it off with his own hands. Shen Yu looked down at Shang Junlin's clear knuckles and couldn't help but wonder if he was dreaming. Otherwise, how could he explain that the emperor didn't want the palace servants to serve him and even personally serve him? Shang Junlin, when Junlin was young, he wasn't treated like a proper prince. Later, he lived in the army for a long time. He knew how to do things that ordinary people did, and he also knew how to do things that ordinary people didn't. The temperature beside the bathtub was very high. After the cloak was undone, Shen Yu felt a lot more relaxed. Because he was half-squatting, Shen Yu looked down at Shang Junlin. He could see the man's long eyelashes, tall nose, and good-looking thin lips. It was said that people with thin lips were fickle. Was Shang Junlin also a fickle person? Shen Yu's eyelashes fluttered slightly. He couldn't help but reach out to touch him. As soon as his fingertips touched, the man raised his eyes. Shang Junlin's eyes were very dark. Shen Yu always thought that his eyes were dark black. He was caught off guard and found that there was a faint purple in the black. The purple was deep and mysterious, as if it was an abyss that tempted people to fall into. Shen Yu stared blankly, as if he was being sucked into that mysterious place. Your Majesty, what is Gui Jun doing? Shen Yu suddenly stopped thinking and looked at Shang Junlin's eyes again. There was no purple in them. It seemed that he was too sleepy to the point that he was bewitched. Your Majesty's eyes are very beautiful. Shen Yu, who came back to his senses, was a little more awake and answered with a smile. Guijuan's eyes are also very beautiful. Shang Junlin's tone was calm, as if he was just telling a fact. Your Majesty, I'll do it myself. Seeing that he was missing another piece of clothing, Shen Yu couldn't sit still anymore. Gui Jun, don't you think it's a little too late to say it now? Shang Junlin looked at his masterpiece and deliberately asked. The cloak and outer shirt were all taken off, leaving only a thin inner garment. The belt was also half undone. Shen Yu looked at his half-undone clothes and fell silent. Shang Junlin insisted, so Shen Yu let him do it. He was very tired and didn't want to move. He was happy to be served by someone. Shang Junlin was the emperor of the 9 and 5. Even he himself was not unhappy, so Shen Yu was even more indifferent. When there was only one piece of clothing left on his body, Shen Yu stopped Shang Junlin's hand. Your Majesty, it's done. Shang Junlin didn't insist anymore. He stood up and bent down to pick up Shen Yu and put him in the bathtub. He reminded him, don't fall asleep. Soaking in the hot water, Shen Yu was a lot more energetic. He nodded, Your Majesty, don't worry. I won't drown myself. Your Majesty, do you want to join me? Shun Yu was soaked in the water from his shoulders down. Only his head was above the water surface. His gaze drifted around. He floated around. His Majesty used facts to prove that he also wanted to soak in the bathtub. Shang Junlin cleaned himself up much faster than Shun Yu. Shun Yu didn't soak for long before he felt the water ripple around him. When he turned around, Shang Junlin had already swam to his side. Shang Junlin's appearance was different from usual when he wore the emperor's clothes. Without the clothes that represented power, Shang Junlin's aura was much gentler. His long hair was tied up and let down. It suddenly made people realize that apart from the emperor's identity, Shang Junlin was not that old now. "Why are you staring at me?" Shang Junlin asked when he noticed Shun Yu's gaze on him. "Shun Yu, Your Majesty, the injuries on your body." From his shoulders down, Shang Junlin's body was crisscrossed with scars. Some of them could be seen from a long time ago. Most of them were from the battlefield. Shang Junlin didn't care much about the injuries on his body. Why are there so many of them left? And some of them were obviously left behind because he didn't treat them in time. When I joined the army in my early years, the situation was complicated. I didn't use my real identity. Many of the injuries were left behind at that time. After that time, the situation became a lot better. When talking about the most difficult time, Shang Junlin's tone was still casual. Shun Yu gently touched a wound under Shang Junlin's shoulder. This wound almost spanned across half of the man's chest. Even after so many years, it still looked ferocious. It was not difficult to imagine what it was like when he was injured. "Your Majesty, was it painful at that time?" Shun Yu couldn't help but think of Shang Junlin's young appearance. He wore an ill-fitting armor and fought with an enemy who was taller than him. Because Shun Yu had soaked in hot water for a while, her hand was not as cold as before. When she touched the wound with her warm hand, Shang Junlin's heart skipped a beat. A very strange feeling spread from the place where their skin touched. His heartbeat unconsciously accelerated, and an unknown throbbing rose from the bottom of his heart. It was as if a pair of warm hands had passed through time and space and healed the scars in the lonely young man's heart. "Gui Jun," Shang Junlin grabbed Shun Yu's wrist and pulled her towards him with a little force. "I actually didn't feel it for a long time. When he first went to the battlefield, new wounds were added almost every day. After receiving so many injuries, he became numb. Later, even if he was covered with scars, he could still take the enemy's head." Shun Yu leaned on Shang Junlin's chest and listened to the man's strong heart. He couldn't tell what he was feeling. He thought, why couldn't he be reborn in an earlier time period? Even if he could touch the young man who had been suffering since childhood, it would be good enough. "Your Majesty is obviously God's favored one. You shouldn't have to suffer like this. I think it's good this way." Shang Junlin was very glad. If he wasn't strong enough, how could he give the person he wanted to protect an environment where she could live freely? Shun Yu and Shang Junlin were close together. Suddenly, they felt something strange between their waists. They quietly moved away. Before they could move away, an arm appeared around their waists and they moved back again. Shang Junlin leaned against Shun Yu's neck and chuckled. "Where do you want to go, Gui Jun?" Shun Yu trembled when his hot breath brushed past the sensitive skin on her neck. "Your Majesty, you're hurting me." The man didn't seem to notice Shun Yu's embarrassment. He was still close to Shun Yu. "Gui Jun, stay with me for a while." Shun Yu's toes curled up. He really wanted to ask Shang Junlin if he was the one who was hurt. Could he continue to stay as if nothing had happened? However, he couldn't bear it because he imagined a poor young version of Shang Junlin in his mind. "Your Majesty, can you let go?" Shun Yu felt a burning sensation. He couldn't convince himself to ignore it and couldn't help but struggle. "Don't move," Shang Junlin groaned when Shun Yu moved. His voice was low and hoarse. "If you move again, I can't guarantee what will happen next." Chapter 35. "Your Majesty, I think you'll feel better if you let me go," Shun Yu suggested seriously. "But I don't want to let you go. Be good and let me hug you for a while." The man's voice was tinted with different colors because of his desire, which made Shun Yu's ears tingle. The hand around his waist was very obedient. Shun Yu stood still for a while. After confirming that Shang Junlin really didn't intend to do anything to him here, he felt relieved. He didn't dare to tease Shang Junlin anymore. Sometimes, men couldn't stand being teased. However, after waiting for a while, Xinyu couldn't wait any longer. Instead, the situation became more and more serious. The two of them were very close to each other. Their skin was only separated by a thin layer of clothes. After being soaked in the hot water, the thin cloth almost didn't have any effect. The burning sensation spread from the outside to the inside. Xinyu didn't feel sleepy at all. If he could still fall asleep in this situation, he was really careless. No matter how sleepy Xinyu was, he couldn't ignore the situation at hand. "Your Majesty, why don't you let me go?" It was easier to calm down when he was alone than now. Shang Junlin buried his head in Xinyu's shoulder and didn't make a sound. Xinyu moved a little. His waist was instantly tightened. Xinyu couldn't understand why Shang Junlin would rather suffer than let him go. It was quiet in the bathtub. Even the sound of splashing water disappeared. Xinyu's body was getting hotter and hotter. He didn't know if it was because he was scalded by the water or because he was scalded. "Your Majesty!" Xinyu exclaimed. He felt the man behind him move slightly. Under the burning sensation, Xinyu couldn't help but feel numb. "I can't stay here any longer. I have to stay away from Shang Junlin." An alarm went off in his mind. A sense of crisis suddenly arose. Xinyu couldn't care about anything else. He pulled the arm around his waist and wanted to leave. "Where are you going?" Before Xinyu was far away, Shang Junlin hooked Xinyu's clothes and pulled hard. Xinyu turned around in the water and lay face to face in Shang Junlin's arms. This position was even more dangerous than before. Xinyu was clearly aware of this. He had no choice but to bite the bullet and say, "His Majesty said he wouldn't touch me." Shang Junlin was silent for a while and said hoarsely, "I won't do it to the end." Xinyu's hair stood on end as he thought about the ointment incident. After that, he asked Shang Junlin for some books so that he could know what a man should do with a woman. But that didn't mean he could face this kind of thing calmly. Just by sticking close to it, they could feel the terrifying aura. How could they possibly enter? "Jin is very uncomfortable." Shang Junlin pulled Xinyu's hand down. "Gui Jun, please help Jin." The man's voice was filled with irrepressible desire. His voice was lower and hoarser than usual, but it was also more seductive. Xinyu didn't notice this. He just wanted to withdraw his hand, but the man held it tightly and he couldn't break free. But how could his strength be compared to Shang Junlin's? No matter how hard he resisted, he still touched it. "Your Majesty, be good. Touch it." The man coaxed in a low voice. "I don't want to. Let go of me." The water rippled around them. Occasionally, the man's coaxing and the young man's sobbing refusal could be heard from the hazy mist. After some time, the sound of water gradually stopped. Xinyu rubbed his sore wrist and said in a hoarse voice, "I don't want to wash. Jin will also help Gui Jun." Xinyu avoided Shang Junlin's hand. "I don't want to. I want to go back to sleep." Xinyu didn't know how attractive he looked at the moment. The corners of his eyes were red and there were water droplets on his eyelashes. With just a glance, Shang Junlin's eyes darkened. "Come here, Xinyu took advantage of the man's relaxed state and swam far away. When he heard Shang Junlin's words, he subconsciously shivered and shook his head as he retreated. Shang Junlin swam to Xinyu's side and held him in his arms. He whispered in his ear, "Why are you running? The water will be cold if we continue to soak in it. Your Majesty, let's go back." Xinyu reached out to stop the approaching man. He just wanted to end this absurd scene as soon as possible. Don't worry. The water here won't be cold. Didn't you notice that the water in the bathtub is still warm after so long?" Xinyu felt that it seemed to be true. After so long, the water in the bathtub should have become cold. However, the temperature of the water now was about the same as when he first entered the bathtub. As the two of them got closer, Xinyu felt something and was shocked. "Your Majesty, didn't you just, Gui Jun, do you think Xin can be satisfied so easily?" Shang Junlin deliberately got closer. The light fragrance on Xinyu's body became more obvious in the steam. Shang Junlin liked it very much. He liked this smell and couldn't help but lower his head to sniff it. The tip of his nose and lips brushed against the skin on his neck, causing him to shiver. Shun Yu felt a familiar sensation and couldn't help but shiver. Your Majesty, my hand hurts. Shang Junlin rubbed Shun Yu's wrist. Don't use your hand this time. In the end, Shun Yu was carried out of the bathtub by Shang Junlin. He didn't have any strength left. His whole body was weak and in great pain. He hadn't fallen asleep yet. He lay in Shang Junlin's arms with his eyes closed. When they walked out of the door, the weather outside and inside the room was completely different. Shun Yu felt a little cold and tightened his grip on the robe in his hands. What's wrong? Shang Junlin noticed his movements and stopped. Shun Yu didn't say anything. Shang Junlin paused for a moment and then ordered Eunuch Meng to bring the cloak in his arms and cover Shun Yu with it. Shun Yu didn't say a word to Shang Junlin until he fell asleep. He was too tired and didn't want to talk to Shang Junlin. He said that he was very uncomfortable, but Shang Junlin didn't want to let go of him. Shun Yu was already very sleepy. After this incident, he was even more exhausted. He forced himself to stay awake for a while, but he couldn't help but fall asleep when they were about to reach the bedchamber. Shang Junlin came back with Shun Yu in his arms. Mu Shi, who had been waiting for most of the night, was about to go up to him when Eunuch Meng pulled her away. Didn't you see that His Majesty was so worried about Gui Jun? Why did you go up to him at this time? Mu Shi was worried. Is Gui Jun okay? Eunuch Meng, with His Majesty around, how could anything happen to Gui Jun? Mu Shi, but Gui Jun, Eunuch Meng, Aya, why don't you understand? Think about it, His Majesty and Gui Jun have been bathing together for so long. It's just the two of them, and now His Majesty is carrying Gui Jun back. Mu Shi, Eunuch Meng, what do you mean? Eunuch Meng gave her a you understand look. It's exactly what you're thinking. Shang Junlin carried Shun Yu all the way to the bed. She was probably exhausted. Even after Shang Junlin changed his clothes and lay down on the bed, Shun Yu didn't wake up. Not long after Shang Junlin lay down, Shun Yu, who had her back to him, rolled a few times and snuggled into his arms. She found a comfortable position and stopped moving. Shang Junlin found it funny. He pulled her into his arms and thought to himself, just now, she kept avoiding me and didn't let me get close. She was quite honest when she fell asleep. // After Prince Li returned home, he told Princess Consort Li that the Qian family's matter had been settled. Princess Consort Li didn't think too much about it at first. She was only happy that the Qian family had finally escaped disaster. Soon, she realized that something was wrong. Princess Consort Li was a very intelligent woman. It was fine when she didn't find anything wrong. Once she found something, she could dig deeper and find out more about the truth. In the morning, she stopped Prince Li, who was about to leave the room, and asked, "Are you hiding something from me?" "What are you talking about, Princess? Why would I hide anything from you?" Prince Li subconsciously retorted. "Every time you feel guilty, you call me Princess." Princess Consort Li mercilessly exposed Prince Li's lie. "I really didn't. How can you not believe me?" Prince Li knew that this kind of thing couldn't be hidden, but he wanted to delay telling Princess Consort Li the truth. He didn't want Princess Consort Li to blame herself for this. Princess Consort Li listed the abnormalities in the residence one by one and said coldly, "What did you say to His Majesty when you went into the palace last time? What did you use in exchange for the lives of the Qian family? Don't be angry, it's really nothing." Seeing that Princess Consort Li was really angry, Prince Li knew that he couldn't hide it anymore. He told her the truth, "I just gave up some of my authority as Prince Li. It's really nothing, don't worry." "Really? Really, as long as you don't despise me for having nothing in the future." After making it clear to Princess Consort Li, Prince Li didn't hide his movements anymore. He took inventory of all the properties under his name, handed over what should be handed over, and sold what should be sold. The bigger the movement, the more people who found out. Some people who were close to Prince Li came to inquire about it, but they were all calmly sent back. Prince Li is actually very smart. This move of retreating in order to advance, not only did he maintain his reputation, but he also sold His Majesty a favor. Shun Yu scooped a spoonful of porridge and slowly put it into his mouth. Why do you say so, young master? She didn't understand. Prince Li originally angered His Majesty because of what happened at the palace banquet last time. He probably also knows that his actions all these years have been a bit too much. Instead of waiting for His Majesty to settle the score, he might as well take the initiative to express his attitude and take the opportunity to step down. That way, he can still have a good ending. When Shun Yu woke up, it was already noon the next day. Shang Junlin wasn't around. When she helped him wash up, she said that His Majesty had specifically ordered that no one should disturb him. Food was also prepared at all times, just waiting for him to wake up. Shun Yu wasn't that angry about this matter, but he still felt a little depressed. Moreover, when he woke up, the discomfort in his body didn't lessen, but became even worse. Hand. Fortunately, he used his left hand last night, which didn't affect the use of his right hand. He suspected that Shang Junlin did it on purpose, even thinking about which hand to use in advance. Needless to say, his legs were sore from just taking 2 steps, and there was always a strange feeling. This was the most unbearable part for Shun Yu. He didn't need to look to know that it was definitely red. When he woke up, it was ice cold. Medicine must have been applied. The small kitchen listened to someone's orders, and all the dishes today were light. Shun Yu poked the porridge in his bowl and said, Mushi, bring me the storybook that Eunuch Meng sent last time. Yes. There were a few books that talked about men and men in the Mandarin book. Shun Yu only took a few glances at them last time. For his own sake, Shun Yu felt that he should study more. When Shang Junlin came to Yuzhong Palace, he saw that the place where he usually wrote memorials was full of storybooks. He walked over and picked up a book, flipped through 2 pages, and silently put it down. It was all about, and it was full of pictures and text. Why is Gui Jun reading this? Your Majesty, why don't you take a look? Shun Yu stuffed a book into Shang Junlin's hands. Shang Junlin pressed his hand on the spine of the book and asked doubtfully, why? I've read in the book that the recipient's face is full of joy. Why does it hurt so much for me? Shun Yu looked at Shang Junlin with his eyes wide open, as if he really didn't understand. However, Shang Junlin didn't miss the teasing look that flashed through Shun Yu's eyes. Your Majesty, why do I feel so much pain? He was just short of saying that his technique was too bad. Shang Junlin glanced at the book in Shun Yu's hands and said, why don't you try this position with Gui Jun next time? Chapter 36. Not so good. Shun Yu said in his heart. Shun Yu didn't know what switch had been turned on in Shang Junlin, but he felt that this person was completely different from before. Shun Yu silently put away the storybook and didn't intend to provoke Shang Junlin anymore. If he continued, he would most likely be the one to suffer. His legs and hands were still hurting now. He couldn't let it happen again. Noticing that Shun Yu's left hand was not flexible, Shang Junlin reached out and held it. Are you still uncomfortable? The warmth spread along his fingers, and Shun Yu's fingertips trembled. Isn't your Majesty asking the obvious? How can your Majesty be so delicate? Shang Junlin laughed. It's not that I'm delicate, Shun Yu retorted. If you want to blame someone, you have to blame your Majesty for taking too long. Even if it wasn't me, others wouldn't be able to bear it. Shang Junlin's breath paused, and he rubbed Shun Yu's fingers with moderate strength. Jin will give your Majesty a massage. Shun Yu lazily lay on the soft couch. One of his hands was held in the palm of the black-robed man, who rubbed it with moderate strength. Being served by the emperor like this, he didn't feel the slightest bit uneasy. Your Majesty, how is Prince Huayu? Seeing that the atmosphere was becoming more and more ambiguous, Shun Yu had to start another topic. It's no big deal now. I don't understand why his attitude towards me is different from others. It can't be because of our relationship, right? But he didn't see Prince Huayu's attitude towards Shang Junlin that good. Maybe it's because your Majesty reminded him of some past events. Could it be that Prince Huayu withdrew from the fight for the throne back then for some other reason? Shun Yu was interested. There are many secrets hidden in the palace. Outsiders only know that Prince Huayu gave up the position due to illness, but they don't know that something else happened before this. Seeing that Shun Yu was interested, Shang Junlin slowly said, "At that time, Prince Huayu had a close relationship with a man of unknown origin. The late emperor took advantage of this and plotted to kill that man. He then pointed the spearhead at another strong competitor at that time, causing them to fall out. In the end, one died and the other was injured, and the late emperor reaped the benefits." "Shun Yu, how did Prince Huayu find out about the real murderer? Does your majesty know what kind of man Prince Huayu likes?" "Shang Junlin, that man didn't leave any information behind. All relevant records have been destroyed by Prince Huayu. As for what that man looks like, it's probably nothing. After all, the time between the man's appearance and his departure was too short, and his whereabouts had always been very secretive. If it wasn't for Prince Huayu, even fewer people would know of his existence. I don't know how Prince Huayu found out about the real murderer of that man's death. Judging from Prince Huayu's plan, he should have found out soon after the late emperor ascended the throne. The whole thing always had a kind of inexplicable strangeness. Shun Yu didn't know that the royal family had such a secret in his previous life. The book he read after his death also revolved around Shun Qingran's point of view, and didn't talk about this. Does your majesty want to continue investigating?" Shang Junlin nodded. "This person hides very deeply, and we don't know what his real purpose is. I suspect that this matter of Prince Huayu is also related to what happened that year. But Prince Huayu refuses to say," Shun Yu frowned, "can't say, or doesn't want to say. Why did the person behind the scenes plan this?" No one knew the answer. The matter of how to deal with Prince Huayu was put on the agenda. They couldn't get any useful information from Prince Huayu, and they couldn't keep not giving the courtiers and the other members of the royal family an explanation. In the first morning court after the new year, Shang Junlin let people announce Prince Huayu's crime. Everyone was shocked. No one would have thought that Prince Huayu, who had always kept a low profile, would actually hide his true intentions so deeply. No one would have thought that he would be able to plan for so many years, just so that he could one day avenge his lover who had died in vain. No one would have thought that he would be so crazy as to do something that would confuse the royal bloodline. Compared to other things, confusing the royal bloodline was more unacceptable. Immediately, someone wrote a letter asking for a thorough investigation. "Your Majesty, this matter is of great importance, and must be thoroughly investigated." Prime Minister Wang Chongxi stood up. For a time, Shang Junlin's half-brothers of the royal family felt insecure. "Prime Minister Wang, you're wrong. How can such a big scandal be made known to everyone?" Someone was dissatisfied. Is the royal family's face more important, or the purity of the royal bloodline more important? Prime Minister Wang asked. "But, do we want to let the world know that the late emperor was cuckolded by so many people?" The assistant minister of the Ministry of Justice hesitated. "There's no need to be so direct," Prime Minister Wang replied. On this issue, the courtiers started a new round of quarrels. Some thought that this was a serious matter, and must be investigated strictly. Others thought that it was not appropriate to make a big fuss because it concerned the royal family's face. Shang Junlin sat high up and looked down. The courtiers argued. After the coronation, no one could see the emperor's expression clearly. "Your Majesty, please make a decision." In the end, it was Prime Minister Wang who put an end to the argument. "In that case, this matter will be handed over to Prime Minister Wang. This subject obeys." King Yu received the news when he was grounded. His first reaction was disbelief. He grabbed the shoulder of the person who reported the news and said sternly, "How is this possible? How can this prince not be my father's child? Your Highness, don't be anxious. This matter has not been decided yet. Moreover, Your Highness and His Majesty look alike. There's definitely no problem with your background." Yu Wangsong walked back and forth anxiously in the study room. If there was a problem with his bloodline, everything he had planned would go up in smoke. No matter how good his reputation was, no matter how many people supported him, once they found out that he wasn't the son of the previous emperor, everything he had would go up in smoke. Just because he was not the late emperor's bloodline, those old foxes would not allow him to ascend to that position. However, he could not do anything about this matter. He did not have much influence in the capital and could not go against the imperial court. This prince was too anxious. There is still no evidence to prove that this prince is not the late emperor's bloodline. This prince cannot panic. Taking a deep breath, King Yu tried to calm himself down. Your Highness is right. Your Highness does not need to worry. Everyone can see the similarities between you and the current emperor. Moreover, concubine Li has always been doted on by His Majesty. Concubine mother will definitely not do such a shameful thing. King Yu rubbed his temples. Continue to pay attention to the movements outside. If there's anything wrong, immediately inform this prince. Such a big case happened right after the new year. Everyone's mood was very complicated, especially the princes left behind by the late emperor. During the late period of the late emperor's reign, he was muddle-headed and incompetent. For the sake of the throne, the ambitious princes fought until their heads bled. Only after Shang Junlin forcefully intervened did the internal strife stop. The outcome of the struggle for the throne was also tragic. Shang Junlin killed many princes and ministers in one breath. Because of this, the imperial court, which had finally calmed down, almost fell into chaos again. It was only because of Shang Junlin's strong methods that he suppressed them with force that the internal strife was stopped again. The ministers who experienced the internal strife were very glad that it was not any of the princes who ascended to the throne in the end. Who would have thought that the late emperor favored the third prince, the seventh prince, and the 14th prince, were not his biological sons? Speaking of which, Prince Huayu was also very powerful. Without batting an eyelid, he caused a large grassland to grow on top of the late emperor's head. The late emperor had many children. As the investigation deepened, more and more princes were found to have problems with their bloodlines. Especially the younger ones, almost all of them were found to be accurate. Every day, new developments were sent to the imperial palace. When Shang Junlin dealt with matters, he would not hide it from Shen Yu. Shen Yu also learned a lot of information from him. Is there no problem with Prince Yu's background? Shen Yu did not find it strange. If Prince Yu was not the late emperor's child, he would not be similar to Shang Junlin. Your Highness seems to pay more attention to Prince Yu. Isn't Your Highness very clear? He lied to me first. I don't want him to have a good life. It's that simple. Shen Yu was clear in his heart that Shang Junlin probably knew about the matter between him and Prince Yu. Even if he did not know, he did not mind telling him. Then Your Highness will be disappointed. Prince Yu's mother, imperial concubine Li, was one of the few people in the late emperor's harem who was loyal to the late emperor. Your Highness, tell me about it. Even though he was on the same side as Prince Yu in his previous life, Shen Yu still knew very little about imperial concubine Li. The late emperor had many concubines, but there were not many who truly won his heart. Imperial concubine Li was one of them. Imperial concubine Li was a very smart person. She did not fight or snatch. Among the people in the harem, only she did not change. Before the late emperor passed away, imperial concubine Li volunteered to die with him. The late emperor was moved and took care of Prince Yu a lot. That was the late emperor's last favor to Prince Yu as his father. Because of this, Prince Yu was able to survive that turmoil. At this moment, Shen Yu finally understood why Prince Yu always wanted that position. It was because someone had planted a seed in his heart a long time ago. With nutrients, the seed grew with the passage of time. One day, it would play the role that the person who planted the seed wanted. Your Highness, have you found anything new from your investigation of the vassal kings? Your Highness wants to ask about Prince Yu, right? Shang Junlin shook his head. I haven't found anything that's too out of line. If you want to investigate, it's just some minor issues. Shen Yu also knew that Prince Yu was still very cautious at this time. Before he was completely certain, he would not reveal his true ambitions to outsiders. Who could have thought that the always cultured and refined Prince Yu, who stood aloof from worldly affairs? His Highness Prince had always wanted that position. Before the late emperor passed away, he should have left quite a few things for Prince Yu. Shen Yu pondered. Don't look at how the late emperor was muddle-headed, he was still someone who had been an emperor for decades. If he had the heart to protect Prince Yu, he would definitely have left something for Prince Yu to protect himself or even arouse his ambitions. Your Highness, you don't have to spend too much time on Prince Yu. If you have the time, You might as well think about when you can do what you promised me. Shang Junlin didn't like to hear Shen Yu mention the two words Prince Yu. Sensing the man's silent approach, Shen Yu silently moved to the side. After joking and complaining about it last time, Shang Junlin would always hold on to this matter and even glorify it by saying, "You'll feel better if you practice more." Shen Yu tried to change the topic. "Your Highness, we're talking about serious matters. I think that Your Highness should be more concerned about the things between us." Shang Junlin looked calm, but there was a terrible storm hidden inside. He stretched out a hand to stop Shen Yu from retreating and leaned forward. Shen Yu used a book to stop the approaching man. There was a playful look on his face. "Your Highness, did you eat the newly made plum snacks in the kitchen? Why is it so sour?" Hearing the meaning of Shen Yu's words, Shang Junlin raised his eyebrows. "Does Your Highness want to taste it personally? Did I eat it?" Chapter 37. After shooting himself in the foot twice, Shen Yu didn't say anything. He thought to himself, why did His Majesty change? His 2 points are not as funny as before. The two of them read for a while. Shen Yu suddenly thought of two things. "Your Majesty, it's spring. Shall we go out for a walk?" Shen Yu blinked. "Of course, if Your Majesty doesn't have time, the two of us can go." "You want to go out?" Shang Junlin asked. Shen Yu held his head and nodded. "The scenery in spring is very good. I go to the country house every year. If I can't go this year, it will be a pity." Shang Junlin: "What country house?" Shen Yu: "It's one of the few things my mother left me. Your Majesty, you know what kind of life I have in the Count of Zhenbei's residence. Sometimes, I feel that it's better to live in the country house without those troublesome things." Before Shen Yu entered the palace, Shang Junlin asked the hidden dragon guards to investigate. As Shen Yu said, as the only legitimate son of the Count of Zhenbei's residence, Shen Yu did not have a comfortable life in the Count of Zhenbei's residence. For example, his wife and her son, who was about the same age as Shen Yu, were there. Shen Yu's existence was a mistake. Shang Junlin stroked Shen Yu's long hair and said softly, "Gui Jun, don't worry. No one can bully you in the future." He could not change anything in the past, but he would control everything now and in the future. He would not allow anyone to bully Shen Yu under his wings. He knew that Shen Yu would live in a certain country house for a while every year. To outsiders, he said that he was going to a quiet place to recuperate. But as the legitimate son of the Count of Zhenbei's residence, why did he have to move out just to recuperate? It was just an excuse to the outside world. As for the real reason, only the person himself knew. Not knowing what Shang Junlin thought, Shen Yu saw a touch of heartache in his eyes. Shen Yu moved closer to Shang Junlin and asked, "Did His Majesty agree?" Shang Junlin's eyes darkened as he spoke. "I can agree, but do you have anything to say? Shouldn't Your Majesty be unobtainable by riches and honor and unyielding by force?" Shen Yu pretended not to understand the man's hint and opened her 2 pairs of innocent eyes. "Your Majesty, I'm also thinking for you. Spring is coming, and everyone will go out for a walk in the spring to relax. Your Majesty has been busy with official affairs for 2 days, so you should find some time to relax. Relax yourself. Your Highness also knows that we are very busy." Shang Junlin's voice was emotionless. Shang Junlin hadn't had a good rest for several days because there were several matters piling up and waiting to be resolved, and it also involved the matter of mixing up the royal bloodline. Political affairs are never finished. Shen Yu pressed down on the memorial in Shang Junlin's hand. "Your Majesty has so many officials. Some matters should be left to them. Why do you have to do everything yourself? Your Highness is right." Although he said this, Shang Junlin didn't put down the memorial in his hand. The 2 large desks were originally filled with novels by Shen Yu. Shang Junlin's memorials only took up a small part of the space. Later, Shen Yu arranged the books into 2 stacks to give Shang Junlin more space. Shen Yu also knew that Shang Junlin's habits couldn't be changed with just a few words. He stopped the topic and said, "Since Your Majesty is busy, I'll go by myself." "Your Highness wants to leave us alone in the palace?" Shang Junlin raised his eyebrows and looked over. "What does Your Majesty want? Your Highness should know that with your status, You can't leave the palace often. Your Highness should get used to living in the palace and not think about leaving the palace all day long. Shang Junlin's tone was light. Your Majesty means that you won't accompany me and won't allow me to go by myself, right? Shen Yu suddenly stood up and turned to leave. Okay, I understand. I will obediently stay in Yuzhong Palace and won't go anywhere. Shen Yu did what he said. Since then, he didn't mention leaving the palace. However, the people serving them could feel that the atmosphere between them was different from before. It was a lot colder, especially Shen Yu's attitude towards Shang Junlin. Anyone with a discerning eye could see that something was wrong. However, Shang Junlin himself didn't seem to notice anything. Every day, except for going to court, he stayed in Yuzhong Palace as usual. The people serving them didn't understand what the two masters were thinking. They only hoped that the two could reconcile quickly. They didn't want to live in a cold atmosphere every day. The news of Yuzhong Palace quickly spread outside the palace. It wasn't surprising. Yuzhong Palace was too high-profile some time ago and was watched by countless eyes. Instead of saying that the news was accidentally spread outside the palace, it was more accurate to say that it was spread out with deliberate connivance. The ministers gathered together and didn't understand why the two people who were inseparable 2 days ago suddenly quarreled with each other. The shield was broken. The emperor's favor is just a matter of a few words. If you ask me, Shen Guijun shouldn't have been so arrogant in the first place. Yes, people's hearts are fickle. Ordinary people are like this, let alone the emperor. If you ask me, I'm afraid that Shen Guijun's favor will end here. I don't think so. For this news, most people had the mentality of watching a good show. After all, it had nothing to do with them. The relationship between Shen Yu and Shang Junlin didn't affect them much. The two people who had a bigger reaction to this news were the King of Yu and the Count of Zhonbei. The King of Yu accidentally learned of this news when he was investigating the movements in the imperial court. His mood was very complicated. Shen Yu had been showing off in front of him for only a few days, but he had fallen out of favor in the blink of an eye. He was somewhat happy in his heart, but also somewhat dissatisfied in his heart. The reaction of the people in the Count of Zhonbei was completely opposite. The Count of Zhonbei couldn't wait to enter the palace immediately and ask Shen Yu what had happened. Shen Qingran and his son were very happy. The sooner Shen Yu fell out of favor, the happier they would be. These people didn't know that the emperor and the emperor didn't get along with each other because the emperor had fallen out of favor. If they really wanted to investigate, it was better to say that the emperor had fallen out of favor. Yes, the palace servants serving the two people found that the emperor's attitude towards the emperor was still the same as before. What was different was the emperor's attitude towards the emperor. Young master, why? Mu Shi endured for a few days and finally couldn't help but ask. Shen Yu loosened the soil for the junling in the flower pot. He raised this grass carefully and it lived steadily until spring. You want to ask why I have a cold war with the emperor? Mu Shi nodded and looked at Shen Yu worriedly. Young master, you live in the palace. Don't you need to treat the emperor well? Didn't you not want me to enter the palace and didn't think highly of the emperor? Shen Yu put down the small shovel that was loosening the soil and raised his eyebrows. You betrayed so quickly. I originally thought that the emperor was no different from other men. After entering the palace, she could feel how the emperor treated Shen Yu. It could be said that it was Shang Junlin's behavior that changed Mu Shi's view of him. The emperor is naturally different from other people. Shen Yu pinched the slender leaves of the junling. But Mu Shi, you have to know that 2 tastes of indulgence will make a man bad. If you want to be with the emperor for a long time, you must go through various kinds of running in, not 2 tastes of accommodation. Shang Junlin was right. Both of them were very qualified emperors. Similarly, he also had the obvious characteristics of an emperor. After living 2 lives, Shen Yu didn't intend to force himself for anyone, even if that person was the emperor. Mu Shi didn't quite understand. She didn't know what happened between Shang Junlin and Shen Yu. Seeing that her young master had an idea, she didn't ask anymore. Shen Yu's mood was a bit complicated. He always felt that Shang Junlin didn't know what he cared about. Perhaps it was because he didn't care much about him in the past, so Shang Junlin didn't have too many opinions about what he did. Shinyu also liked this way of getting along. They kept two lines and didn't interfere with each other. But he didn't know when Shang Junlin crossed that line. He began to try to control Shinyu. Even if it wasn't obvious, Shinyu still felt it. Shinyu didn't want to be controlled by others. Ever since he knew that the world he existed in was two books and that he was controlled by an invisible consciousness to fall in love with the King of You, he felt disgusted by the feeling of being controlled. He wanted to retreat to safety with Shang Junlin. But it was obvious that Shang Junlin didn't want to. Shang Junlin looked at the booklet for a while and threw the pen to the side in annoyance. "Is your Majesty worried about the matter of your Highness?" Eunuch Meng had served Shang Junlin for so many years, but he had never seen Shang Junlin worried like this. He saw the change in Shinyu's attitude towards Shang Junlin, but he didn't know what happened between the two. The Emperor didn't say anything, and as two servants, it wasn't good to take the initiative to ask. "Jin can't figure out why the Emperor is angry." Shang Junlin rubbed his eyebrows. "It can't be because Jin didn't agree to accompany him out of the palace, right?" Shang Junlin didn't feel that he had done anything wrong. He was the Emperor, and Shinyu was the Emperor. Yuzhang Palace was their home. What was the point of thinking about the outside of the palace all day? Last time, Shinyu wanted to go out of the palace to see the fireworks, and he took him there. Only a few days had passed, and now he wanted to go out of the palace for a walk. Would there be a new reason to leave the palace in a few days? "Why don't Your Majesty directly ask the Emperor? Your Majesty and the Emperor are husband and husband. It's not good for outsiders to intervene in the problems between husband and wife," Eunuch Meng suggested. The word husband pleased Shang Junlin. He stood up. "You're right. If Jin thinks too much and can't get to the point, it's useless. It's better to ask directly. His Majesty has arrived." Shinyu arranged the flower pot properly, and then stood up calmly. He stood up to greet him. "You don't have to be so polite, Gui Jun." Shang Junlin quickly stepped forward and stopped Shinyu. "All of you, leave." Shang Junlin waved his hand twice, and the palace servants retreated one after another. Mu Shi looked at the room worriedly, and then she was pulled away by Eunuch Meng. "Eunuch Meng, will there be any problems?" Mu Shi stood anxiously outside the room, unwilling to leave. "Miss Mu Shi, don't worry. The matters between His Majesty and the Emperor have to be solved by themselves. Others can't intervene," Eunuch Meng comforted her. "You should trust the Emperor. He knows what to do." Eunuch Meng had a clear view of this confrontation. He clearly saw that the one who had the upper hand was the inconspicuous Shen Gui Jun. Their Majesty had lost completely. "What is Your Majesty doing?" Shinyu looked at the empty room and asked. "Jin apologizes to the Emperor for what happened before." Shang Junlin helped Shinyu to sit down. "Don't be angry with Jun, Gui Jun." "I'm not angry with Your Majesty. As the Emperor, how can I be angry with Your Majesty?" Shinyu sat down obediently. There was a smile on his face, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. "You, tell me directly what I did wrong." Shang Junlin squatted down and looked into Shinyu's clear eyes. "You, tell me, what did I do wrong?" You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.